How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the three guys that tell you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them. So the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
And I'm your other host, Justin Bishop.
And I'm the dancing freak, writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you so much for joining us for our fourth chapter in our series covering the work of Mr. Sam Raimi, titled Sam Raimi, The Entertainer.
I once dated a girl with a wooden leg. I had to break it off.
It's a good joke.
That's
it really is.
That's solid comedy.
That's a good joke. Too bad his career didn't get very far after that joke, though. So, speaking of careers, at this point in his career, Sam Raimi he'd been a professional filmmaker for nearly a decade, although he had yet to make a movie with a major Hollywood studio. He'd kind of flirted with Hollywood back on Crime Wave. We know how that went, but that was a very small studio. He had not yet worked with a major studio in Hollywood. Then after Evil Dead 2, Raimi started discussing several ideas for his follow-up film, including another Evil Dead sequel. But one project in particular started to gain traction, in part because it fit with a rising trend in Hollywood in the late 1980s, the superhero movie, a genre that was starting to be seen as financially viable in Hollywood thanks to the success of Tim Burton's Batman in 1989.
Most specifically, the marketing department.
Well, yeah. The resulting film is not based on a particular comic book, but it takes its inspiration from many of the comics and the films that Raimi devoured as a youth. The movie we're talking about is, of course, DARKMAN.
Who
No foolish heroics, if you please.
is DARKMAN? They destroyed everything he had, all that he loved, everything that he was. Now, crime has a new enemy, and justice has a brand new face.
I was afraid that you wouldn't want me anymore.
Of course I still want you.
The good news is that I know who's behind our little troubles of late. Finish it.
He has the power to look like any man,
These two are both sons of witches!
but he is unlike any man.
I gotta tell you something about me.
He's a cockroach. Think you kill him? And he pops up someplace else.
In the darkest hour,
Julie, who's the real monster here?
there's a light that shines on every human being but one. From director Sam Raimi, DARKMAN.
Let's consider this podcast's points, one by one. One, we're definitely going to talk longer than 99 minutes. Two, we're definitely going to get into spoilers. So if you're wondering, what is it about the movie? What secrets does it hold? Well, we're going to tell you.
Can you imagine if we didn't talk longer than 99 minutes, though?
I'd get out and my wife would just be like, what happened?
Is everything okay?
Is everything okay?
The power go out? What's going on? Well, a Sam Raimi superhero movie was a long time coming. Years before he started working on Darkman, Raimi had actually tried to procure the rights to both The Shadow and Batman without any luck.
It's weird. I just thought it was interesting. I saw he had tried before this, and in 2006, he tried again with producer Michael Uslan, or Uslan or something. Anyway, they were trying to get the rights to the Shadow again. He seems to really want to make the Shadow for some reason, but it still fell through.
Fun. It would be really fun. Although I feel like he's kind of gotten a lot of that. Probably what he would have done in the Shadow ended up happening in like the Spider-Man movies, and whatever didn't happen in Spider-Man, he probably got it out of his system with Doctor Strange.
I was gonna say, this was 2006, so I mean, this was after the first Spider-Man, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
That's really interesting, though, because I feel like he does do a lot of what you would expect him to do in the Shadow in this movie, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, granted, you know, there was a movie eventually made of the Shadow by Russell Mulcahy, the guy who did Highlander.
Yeah.
You guys have probably seen that. It's not particularly good. So I could definitely see it being rebooted or redone. I mean, it didn't do particularly well at the box office either, I don't think.
The thoughts and opinions of Justin Bishop on The Shadow do not necessarily reflect the thoughts and opinions of other podcasters.
It's not a great movie. I'm not saying it's not an entertaining movie, but it is not a good movie.
I'm trying to remember The Shadow. Is that Alec Baldwin?
Yeah. Alec Baldwin.
Okay. And then there's Billy Zane and The Phantom.
The Phantom is, yeah. And imagine if there had been a mashup of those. That would have been pretty
so good.
Well, anyway, so he wasn't able to get the rights to the Shadow or Batman because they were already in the works with other people at that point. But not one to just give up. Raimi forged ahead with a hero of his own creation. So when he began to work through ideas for his character, he drew inspiration from not only the Shadow, but from stories like The Elephant Man, The Phantom of the Opera, and of course, classic Universal monster movies from the 30s and 40s. Of these films, Raimi said, quote, "They made me fear the hideous nature of a hero and at the same time drew me to him. I went back to that idea of a man who is noble and turns into a monster." Well, in his book, The Unseen Force, which I've mentioned this book several times on this podcast, it was once again a really good resource for this episode. But the author, John Kenneth Muir, when he's talking about the development of this film and the influences that Raimi could be drawing from, he also puts forth the idea that Raimi may have taken inspiration from a 1932 film called Dr. X, a movie that Raimi would very likely have seen in his childhood when he spent a lot of his free time planted in front of the TV devouring old movies. Nice. So Dr. X.
I haven't seen that. Have you guys seen that?
I have not seen it. I kind of want to look it up now that I have read about it, because I was not particularly familiar with it. Although I hear the title Dr. X and it rings a bell, but it's also kind of, there's probably a million comics and characters named Dr. X, so who knows where that's coming from. But the movie was directed by a guy named Michael Curtiz. Michael Curtiz was one of the greatest directors of his time. This was an earlier film of his, but he would later go on to direct films as diverse as The Adventures of Robin Hood, Casablanca, Mildred Pierce, and White Christmas.
Wow.
Yeah.
So awesome.
I mean, an incredible career. And Dr. X features a plot point where a scientist, in this case, in this movie, it's the film's villain, he's invented a synthetic flesh composition and has been creating masks to carry out his crimes.
I saw an interview with Sam Raimi. It was like a 20-minute sit down with him. And when he was describing his ideas for it, he said that he doesn't know where the genesis originally came from, except that he was really obsessed with being able to change your face. Because he felt ugly inside. No, I don't know. He didn't say that part, but he said he wanted to be able to change, like a guy able to change his face. He actually goes through like a whole detailed process of it, exactly lays it out, which is kind of interesting. But just how he would sit there and go, I like the idea of somebody being able to change their face. What would be the benefit of that? Okay, you could do this and this and this. I don't know. What about he's a superhero like the Shadow or something? And then it's like, okay, and how would he work with that? Oh, he'd be able to act like other members of the gang and dismantle them from within. Okay. And then so I thought about, all right, well, what would make a guy be able to change his face? What would he have to do for a living? And then he was just like, basically he just like explains like the exact layout of how he mapped out everything in there. He had read something about liquid skin. And so he's like, oh, he'll be a researcher working on liquid skin. And then he'll, what's his life like? He'll probably have a girlfriend. And this is, and it's just, anyway, that's his explanation for how everything went. He said he got into the idea of, I just wanted to use this here because it's so Sam Raimi. He just wanted to make it like a comic book, as dynamic and smashing as possible.
Well, I mean, even John Kenneth Muir in his book, he doesn't say that like this is definitely where Raimi got this idea. He's just like, well, there's this other movie that's got a pretty similar plot that might have been one of the many inspirations that Raimi is drawing from in this. I mean, I also thought of the House of Wax. The 50s House of Wax is kind of what came to mind for me. So who knows? But it could have been all these things, and some of them could have been unconscious. You know, it could have been a subconscious kind of thing that, you know, these ideas are just batting around somewhere in the back of his mind.
Oh yeah, he says he
doesn't even know where they're coming from.
Yeah, he says he 100% doesn't know why he got obsessed with the idea of somebody changing their face, but so it could have been from any one of those things. Yeah. And then he wanted to tell a story about it.
Well, Raimi originally fleshed out all of his ideas in a 30-page short story called The Darkman, before developing it into a 40-page treatment. And at this point, according to Raimi, it became the story of a man who had lost his face and had to take on other faces, a man who battled criminals using this power. So by the time he gets to the treatment, that concept that you're talking about, Gary, is fully kind of formed in his mind, the concept of a guy who can change his face. So in 1987, Raimi submitted this treatment to Universal Pictures, and they saw a lot of potential in the story, and they actually gave the green light to the film with a budget in the range of $8 to $12 million. Now, I say in the range because they're not committing to a number yet, because they don't have a full script yet. So they're like, all right, we'll green light this. It's going to be somewhere within this range. Get to work on the script, and then we'll give you a solid number. Then they also suggested that he hire another screenwriter to help him flesh out the story. And Raimi, the screenwriter that Raimi chose was his brother Ivan Raimi, and yet another Raimi brother. I think that's the third one we've talked about on this show so far, right? There's Ivan, there's Ted, there's Sam. Is there another one? There's one more.
It feels like there's another one, but I don't know.
There was the one that passed away.
Yeah, when he was a kid. That's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, Ivan Raimi was a doctor, a medical doctor. So Raimi brought him on. Not only because he wanted to collaborate with his brother, but because he wanted to make sure that the film's medical science was at least somewhat believable. I mean, it is still very far-fetched, but they wanted it to at least have the illusion of being believable. He also collaborated with a young screenwriter named Chuck Farrar, an ex-Navy SEAL who had gotten noticed with his first produced screenplay, which was, appropriately enough, Louis Teague's movie Navy SEALs, starring Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn. Farrar only contributed one draft of Darkman, although he would work with Raimi a little bit later down the line. He was the screenwriter for John Woo's Hard Target, which Raimi actually produced. You guys love Hard Target as much as I do?
I do love Hard Target. I don't even think I knew that
Raimi produced it.
Yeah.
Well, let's not forget, John Woo was involved with another film where people changed their face.
Oh yeah, I was watching it earlier today on VHS.
Nice.
But yeah, I want to do a John Woo series at some point because I don't know a ton about his career, but I like the idea that Sam Raimi is at least partially responsible for John Woo making American movies and coming, to at least his American debut, which is what Hard Target was. But Chuck Farrar would later contribute to screenplays for films such as Barbed Wire, the Pamela Anderson masterpiece.
Oh, yes.
The Jackal, the remake of The Jackal, and John Bruno's Virus. The classics. This is also the third episode that we've mentioned Virus on, because that came up way back in our James Cameron series, remember?
It is
because John Bruno was one of his special effects guys. He helped him out with like the underwater stuff on The Abyss. And so for some reason, the movie Virus just keeps coming up on this show.
Hopefully it's in roulette, or at least it should be a bonus episode. The one where the guys finally see Virus.
I think it's kind of like the rule of Beetlejuice. Like if we mention it and again in another episode, it appears behind us in a mirror or something.
Yeah, I hope it's just Jamie Lee Curtis behind me in a mirror.
Yeah.
So after a draft from Farrar and several additional drafts that Sam worked on with his brother Ivan, Raimi and his producer, Rob Tapert, started toiling away on additional drafts of the script. And in doing so, they kind of started to realize that they may have a potential superhero franchise on their hands. Tapert would later tell Cinefantastique magazine, and this was in an interview he was doing I think it was an on-set interview for one of the Darkman sequels. He said, quote, "Sam and I really wanted to see Darkman live on as a franchisable character and as an American superhero. In 50 years, Darkman should be on the damn tour at Universal with Frankenstein."
Bold ambitions.
Yeah, it sure is.
But at the same time, like I recently fell down a rabbit hole of looking into the Universal monsters.
Todd, are you okay?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I pulled a little something here, but I'm good, man. No, I was looking at the stuff, and there's a bunch of what are considered the Universal monsters. I think a lot of people think that they're 5, maybe 6 Universal monsters. There's actually a bunch that are considered the classic Universal monsters. But in looking at some of the details about the production and distribution, I think if those are if that's the golden age, like this is a little bit of comic jargon, if that's the golden age of Universal monsters, I think there needs to be either a modern age or at least a silver and bronze age, where Darkman is definitely considered a Universal monster, and I have 3 others.
Okay,
based on my research. So I don't know if
I want to know.
You do want to know?
I want to know it.
Okay.
Were you going to withhold that information? Just tease us with it?
I was going to tease you with it because initially, pulling back the curtain a little bit on what we do is generally, we do a bonus episode after we record. This was going to be my bonus episode, but then Justin was like, "Oh, we should do the Darkman sequels for the bonus," and I was like, "Yeah, we can't not discuss the sequels." So, my initial idea for what was going to be the bonus episode for this podcast of covering Darkman was my pitch to include King Kong, Michael Myers, Candyman, and Darkman in a new batch of Universal monsters.
Those are not all Universal.
But if you look at the classic Universal monsters, not all of them were initially or from beginning to end of their existence conceived or distributed by Universal. They flew under they did fly under the Universal flag at some point. And all the characters I just mentioned did the same thing.
I know.
Like I said, if you want to consider the silent Phantom of the Opera as part of the Universal Classic Monsters, which apparently nobody does, but you could because it was conceived and distributed by Universal. And Phantom of the Opera is considered later. But anyway.
I'm starting to regret asking.
See, that's why I said this could be the bonus episode.
I mean, here's the deal. When you talk about the collective, like the name Universal monsters, it's Dracula, Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Mummy, and the Wolfman. You could also throw Phantom of the Opera in there because there was
Black Lagoon and the Invisible Man. Those are kind of the staples.
Yeah, I said this.
Did you say Invisible Man?
Oh no, I said Creature from the Black Lagoon. I didn't say Invisible Man, but yeah, I would include him as well.
Yeah.
But those were all ones that the first movie in each of those franchises was released by Universal.
Not necessarily.
Okay, well, we'll talk.
Wow.
We'll talk about this when we do a Universal monsters.
So I said this could be the bonus, man.
And when I say that, I mean obviously I know that like Thomas Edison made his own Frankenstein, but that's not the Universal Monsters version of Frankenstein. The Boris Karloff,
Thomas Edison,
yeah,
like the light bulb guy.
Yeah, yeah. He did a silent Frankenstein film. Yeah. Anyway, this is a tangent we don't need to go on.
Right.
But that's something we'll cover down the line when we do a Universal Monsters series. But I would have a hard time believing that the versions of those characters that we all know and love did not originate with Universal, because they did. Dracula and Frankenstein originated in books. I mean,
right. They're adaptations.
Yeah,
not necessarily conceived by Universal.
Did you guys ever see what the fuck was it? Darkman?
Oh yeah, let's talk about Darkman. So because Todd's arguing semantics over here about what is and isn't a Universal monster, and
no. What's a classic Universal and what I think should be considered a new batch of Universal monsters.
There's nobody on the face of this planet besides you, Todd, that would consider Michael Myers a fucking Universal monster.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, let's talk about Darkman. So they're working on this script.
I'm going to send Liam Neeson to both your houses.
Justin has a particular set of skills, and I'd like to see them go head to head.
Oh man, where were we? Okay, so we're writing the script. Anyway,
Yes.
they decide that they realize that Darkman does have the potential to be like a franchise, a superhero. But in order to get the script and the character to that level, they had to start refining some stuff. They had to make sure everything was coming together on the page in a way that would lend itself to future successes. And that meant even more rewrites. So to facilitate this, 2 writers named Daniel and Joshua Golden were brought in based on the strength of a screenplay that they had written for Universal called Welcome to Buzzsaw.
According I didn't see anything on that. Did that ever get off the ground? Or
not that I'm aware of, at least not under that title. If you look under them on IMDb, I mean, you'll see a few credits, but that's not one of them. So if it did, it was under a different name. But sometimes
it's a pretty cool title.
It's a pretty cool title, and it's weird. Like sometimes writers will get noticed for scripts that they write, and then the scripts never get made. It's just like they get stuck in development hell or whatever. It's really odd. Well, according to Daniel Golden, when he and his brother were brought in onto Darkman, the film the project at this point was a big, interesting heap of documents. That's how they described it. Daniel Golden went on to explain there was a treatment that Sam had written, and then a draft that Chuck Farrar had wrote. And we read another draft that was a combination of many drafts that had Sam and Ivan's name on it. There were lots of little story documents. There was just material everywhere, drafts that seemed to go in many directions. So what it sounds like is that Sam and Ivan and Chuck, who wrote the one script, they had all these ideas, but they needed to put them together. They needed to like refine it and just kind of like you're making a sculpture, just like going away at it and trying to get rid of all the fluff, that you don't need. And that's kind of what they were brought in to do, to kind of like just chip away at this thing and turn it into something that could be produced into a movie. He actually explained that their mission was to turn this interesting mix of ideas into a coherent emotional drama. But they only had about a month to work on it. That's all the Goldens were given. Universal brought them in. Universal had them brought them in because of this other script that they'd written. But Universal's like, all right, we want you to work on this. These guys need a little bit of help bringing this thing in, but you've got 1 month to do it. So, and the reason that they only had a month is because Universal already had another project that they wanted them to work on a month later. And oddly enough, that project was Problem Child. Which is just
similar plot.
Yeah. When's the last time you guys saw Problem Child?
It's somebody's favorite movie. It's somebody's favorite.
That little ginger kid who stars in it. It's his favorite movie.
Yeah, I remember they played Bad to the Bone. I knew that song because of Terminator 2 and Problem Child.
Yeah, I remember John Ritter. I remember the grandpa who owned the toy store was an asshole, and that's all I really remember about it. That's all I remember. Anyway, so after the Goldens polished up this screenplay, contributing new ideas of dialogue, new characters, new bits of action, they worked a lot on the relationship between the two leads, the Peyton and Julie. They worked on kind of how that relationship would work in the movie a little bit better than what had been written before. But even after all this, the studio still wasn't totally satisfied, which led to the Raimi brothers writing several additional drafts of the script, all building upon what had come before. Now, this isn't entirely unusual. This happens with most movies, honestly. It happens with most movies. There's multiple writers involved. There's multiple drafts. And at this point, after 12 drafts of this script, they finally had a shooting script that the studio was happy with. And Universal assigned the film a budget of $11 million. That eventually got raised to $14 million, which is not a huge budget, even by the standards of the late 80s. But it is astronomically higher than any budget that Raimi had worked with in the past. What was Evil Dead 2? Like $3.5–4 million?
Right, I think so.
Something like that. So this is triple that. So,
jeez,
yeah, pretty insane. And yeah, it's always weird. I always like picture when I see who wrote a movie script. I'm like, oh my god, these guys, like, they must. I wish I had the ability to sit down and just write a script, just like all write out just immediately. Like, I think I picture in my head like it all comes out at once. Like, it's just there. This was half a day, and I wrote this thing. And not
even if there's just a single screenwriter, on it, those screenwriters are often working on this for months or years at a time. And then sometimes you've got uncredited ghostwriters, script doctors coming in, and you don't even see their name on the screen, but you'll see their contributions. The script doctors.
1, 2 screenplays kneel before you. That is such a stupid joke. Why did I do that?
I don't know, but it got me.
Earlier you mentioned John Ritter, and I for some reason the first thing that came to my mind when you said his name was I remember watching MTV back in the day, and there was a whole thing about how on FX or something, it was on like the news, MTV News, and they were saying
Tabitha Soren
that John Ritter had they were replaying Three's Company. That's the show he was in, right? I think so. And there was a scene they had found where like he wore really short shorts and he jumps on the bed and you can see his ball.
Just one
ball,
singular ball,
a testicle.
Wow.
And I remember them talking about that, and they had John Ritter on there, like an interview, because they had to go by. They're like, "Wow, it took this long to find this," and FX just had to go in and like remove that scene. And they're like, "Did you have any thoughts on that?" And he said, "Well, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't."
This is where you
Newsday over at MTV.
This is where you insert the sound clip of that one kid talking to the other kid on Billy Madison. Did you see that guy's balls?
Yeah, they were weird looking.
Weird looking.
Oh man, Adam Sandler's across town as we're recording this.
Really?
We could be there instead of doing what we're doing right now.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, why would you do that? I could sit over here and just be like, maybe I'll just do the rest of the episode.
Just do the rest of the episode as Adam Sandler.
What are you looking at, Sean?
Oh, so
we have gone off the rails quickly.
We have
a bunch of times.
We have. I had hopes that this would be one of the shorter episodes, but we have.
So did it. So did my wife.
Yeah, but no.
His name's Robert G. Durant. I told you when I make the pickup. No! Again! Don't! I told you everything.
I know, Rick. I know you did.
But let's pretend you didn't.
Anyway, where are we? Pre-production. So we've got a budget. Once pre-production began, it was immediately apparent that this was going to be a film that required a wide variety of special effects. Everything from miniatures to matte paintings to optical effects. All of these things were going to be needed to pull off Raimi's vision. And the man responsible for the majority of these effects was William Mesa, the film's visual effects supervisor. Raimi originally got in contact with Mesa after completing Evil Dead 2. At the time, Mesa was actually working with Evil Dead 2's producer, Dino De Laurentiis, on an early version of Total Recall back when Australian director Bruce Beresford was attached to the project. If you want more on that story, go back and check out our Total Recall episode when we did our Paul Verhoeven series a few months ago. Raimi and Tapert wanted Mesa and his company's called Introvision. They wanted them involved in Darkman, so they toured the company's facilities. And at the time, Introvision was like the second or third largest visual effects company in the world. This is behind, like Lucasfilm. They had 3 large stages, a complete model and machine shop. They're kind of a big deal. And this is before digital imagery was used regularly. James Cameron and Sam Winston's digital domain was still a few years away. I think that was like 93, 94 when they founded that, if I remember right. However, Introvision had a process that they created and that only they used. They had patented this process called a dual process. That's what they describe it as. And this allowed you to put people into picture imagery and project a picture on 2 screens at the same time. So here's how Mesa kind of describes the process. See if this makes sense. He says, quote, "It's one projector that projects onto 2 screens simultaneously and a matting system that allows you to mat out different portions of the images. So an actor, when he's out on the stage, looks like he's behind objects in the picture. He's set back rather than just in front of the picture, which at the time was the technology of blue screen or projection photography. So you think about projection photography, whether it be rear projection or front projection, and you're basically the actor is kind of separated from the image because it can only be behind him. This is a technology where they can actually project stuff in front of the actor, and they use this matting system to kind of block it out, if that makes sense. Really interesting and not something that you see done very often. So Raimi sees this technology and he got inspired. He's like, we can do something that I've never been able to do before, that hardly anyone's been able to do before, because this is kind of new technology. And this process was used most notably in the rooftop sequence at the end of the film.
The budget here is weird. Like Sam Raimi talks about, you mentioned that the budget gets raised throughout. It's just like they're doing all this stuff, and even the studio starts to know like it's really special, so they start to give them a little bit more leeway. I guess what I was thinking of here is that Sam talks about it, and one of the biggest differences with having a budget like they do here is that like all these things that they're getting to do, you get to bring in professionals, and they're not used to that. And he was like, it's me and Rob and Bruce doing everything, and so this is which he says is like a trade-off. You get cool concepts like the stuff you're talking about that they would never have done or thought of, but also you can't do all of the insane things that you would normally do.
Yeah, you can't just beat the shit out of your main actor and call it a day like they did on Evil Dead 2.
Right.
Raimi's budget afforded him the opportunity to work with new cutting-edge technology like the one we're talking about here, but it also allowed him a whole new world of actors, people that he would never have been able to afford before this movie. Of course, Raimi would have liked to have had Bruce Campbell in the film's title role. That was the original plan, but that wasn't going to be possible on a film of this scale. There was no way that Universal was going to sign off on Bruce Campbell, because Bruce Campbell's not, I don't know, he's not well known enough, I guess, at this point.
Not at that point. Yeah.
So they needed a more recognizable lead. Gary Oldman and Bill Paxton were both considered for the film for a while. I think Bill Paxton would have been a terrible choice for this. As much as I love Bill Paxton, I just can't see him doing this role. Gary Oldman could have been kind of cool. I think Gary Oldman could have pulled this off. He got to do kind of the fucked up face in Hannibal, though, right? Way more fucked up than this.
Oh yeah, way dark.
God, I forgot about that.
That like Mitch McConnell mask that he wears.
Mitch McConnell mask. Oh my god. The point is, Gary Oldman can do anything. I don't think there's any role that Gary Oldman, even a little person, Gary Oldman.
He's done it. He's done it. So, when neither one of those worked out, the role ended up going to Liam Neeson.
Yeah, supposedly Bill Paxton was friends with Liam Neeson and told him about this audition. And so when Neeson got this role, Paxton was so pissed off at him, he did not speak to him for months.
He cock-blocked him on the role. That's rude. Well, Neeson, of course, he would shoot to stardom with Schindler's List 3 years after this. But at the time that he was cast in the role of Dr. Peyton Westlake, he was a promising up-and-comer. He had started his career in his native Ireland, where he had acted in plays in his teens, and then later joined the Lyrics Players Theatre in Belfast. His first film role was in the 1978 film adaptation of the allegorical Christian novel Pilgrim's Progress. Now, Todd, you went to not Bob Jones University. You went to the Academy. So I know you had to read Pilgrim's Progress, right?
Kindergarten through 8th grade, a 9-year sentence for a crime I'm not sure I committed. If I never have to read Pilgrim's Progress again. I definitely read it because I went to a Christian school as well, up through the 7th grade, up through 7th grade. Ooh. So 2 different schools, but yeah, so we definitely had to read Pilgrim's Progress. And I'm pretty sure I even watched the movie at some point, although obviously I had no idea who Liam Neeson was at the time. But in the film, he played the role of the evangelist, and he also appeared as the crucified Jesus Christ. Now, Gary, don't get all hot and bothered at the thought of that.
We left that joke in, folks. I petitioned for it to come out, but
no, it stayed. It stayed. I made an executive decision.
I was trying to show a little respect for our Lord and Savior, but nope. All right.
In 1980, Liam Neeson got a big break when director John Boorman saw him on stage as Lenny in Of Mice and Men and cast Neeson in the role of Gawain in Excalibur. After that, he continued to get higher and higher profile roles, most notably starring alongside Mel Gibson and Anthony Hopkins in The Bounty, and with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons in The Mission. He got critical acclaim for his role in Suspect, which he starred in with Cher and Dennis Quaid. And in 1988, he starred with Clint Eastwood in the 5th Dirty Harry film, The Deadpool.
Also starring Ryan Reynolds.
You're probably thinking, whose balls did I have to fondle to get my very own movie? Well, I can't tell you his name, but it rhymes with pulverine. And let me tell you, he's got a nice pair of smooth criminals down under.
You know
I
who
like
else is
that you did that impersonation, but I don't understand that joke.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do either. I think Gary actually thinks that we're talking about. I mean, I think Todd actually thinks we're talking about Deadpool, the comic book character.
No, I'm well aware, but I was just like, yeah, I can't not do a line from Deadpool as Clint Eastwood. So
you know who else is in the Deadpool is Jim Carrey.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Liam Neeson's film role just prior to Darkman is 1989's Next of Kin, co-starring Patrick Swayze, where he plays like I think he plays Patrick Swayze's brother. He's like getting revenge on some. I don't know. Getting revenge on people is kind of a thing for Liam Neeson. It seems like as I was researching this, I was like, oh, like this didn't start with Taken. He's been doing this his whole career.
He's good at it.
He's good at it. And I guess for Todd's sake, we should also note that he appeared in the 1988 film The Good Mother, directed by none other than Leonard Nimoy.
Yes.
You've never seen that movie.
You're right.
At least he's excited.
During filming, Neeson had to wear a 10-piece prosthetic makeup, sometimes for 18 hours at a time. This makeup took like 3-4 hours to put on every day. And the makeup effects were designed by Tony Gardner, who he's going to work with Raimi again on his next film that we'll talk about in our next episode. If Gardner's name sounds familiar to Cinema Shock listeners, it's because we discussed him in our episode on Return of the Living Dead. He was brought in to create the reanimated half corpse that Don Calfa has to interrogate. You know, the one of the most memorable scenes in the whole film. They basically brought Tony Gardner in just to make that.
That's a good looking scene.
Yeah. It is a good scene. So for the role of Darkman's love interest, Julie Hastings, Julia Roberts, and Demi Moore were considered. And I found a fun little tidbit about this. So this is before Julia Roberts was famous. This is before Pretty Woman made her one of the most famous women in the world. Apparently, her and Liam Neeson had dated not too long before the casting process for this film. She came in, she did an audition like opposite Liam Neeson. They did a scene together because he'd already been cast. And apparently she just crushed it. She did great. It was very emotional. They, according to the casting director, Nancy Nayor, both of the actors had tears in their eyes. It was like very, very, intimate is how she described it. Wow. Well, right after the audition, Julia Roberts' agent called and said that it might be best if she were taken out of consideration for the role. And Nancy Nayor kind of speculates that she may have felt that it would be too awkward for the two of them to work together after they had like just broken up. But otherwise, this could have been Julia Roberts' like first big starring role.
That might have been cool.
It might have been, but ultimately it went to Raimi's old roommate, Frances McDormand, who had just received an Academy Award nomination for her role in Mississippi Burning. So they got a pretty good substitute in there. Mississippi Burning, by the way, is, we've talked about Alan Parker here on the show before. Yeah. He did Pink Floyd's The Wall, Angel Heart. I think we talked about him a lot when in your little bonus episode on David Warner, because they work together a lot.
I hope Julia Roberts and Demi Moore are okay, having not gotten this role.
I think they'll be all right.
Yeah. I worry about them.
Yeah, Frances McDormand, actually, I mean, in the interviews on the thing, it seems like they were still doing the living together thing with the Coens and stuff. She talks a little bit about how Sam Raimi was working with them on Blood Simple and like helped them get their first thing in with Blood Simple and all that. At this time, she was working still, even with acting jobs, apparently, as she said, as a word processor for an organization that answered fan mail for AC/DC.
Wow. AC/DC was getting so much fan mail in the late 80s that they had to hire a company to respond to it.
Yeah. And I just thought that was wild. She said that she thinks she got this role then because Sam wanted somebody he could trust, and that he'd also been getting some kickback on how females were portrayed in his movies.
But not uncalled for, I would say.
Yeah. And he said he thought she also needed to be able to pay her rent.
Well, yeah, especially since they were roommates. He wanted her kicking in her portion of the rent.
One thing
they
that's really
butted heads on set a little bit though, because she came from like a stage background, and which Raimi had never worked in stage. So he had a directing process that kind of clashed with her style of directing. And she also kind of like didn't like the idea of Julie turning into a like a damsel in distress. Although in later interviews, we'll say another source I used on this, and it's on the Hollywood Reporter. They did a 30th anniversary oral history of Darkman, and in that interview, Frances McDormand says like that she was wrong, basically that she should have played the character as written, because that's what the film needed, basically. Not that I think I think her performance is very good in this. I don't think it hurt the film, but it did cause some tension between her and Sam.
Yeah, they definitely clashed. They didn't, I guess, think they knew each other well enough, or as well as they thought they did. But the the thing about it is that I was going to bring up is that it is kind of interesting. Liam and her both have this like serious stage background, and she has like a master's in theater or something, and like so she had not planned on being in a movie like this. But part of the deal was, that kickback I mentioned. She says, Sam knew that she would bring something to the different to the role, and he knew that. He says it in some of the stuff too, that she would take lines that she's like, this is false, this would not work, and she would he would work with her to like redo some of her lines or some of the ways that she acted. She's a feminist, he knew that, and so he advocated for her to be there, and he wanted that out of her. But then she describes that, like, going back to what you're saying, is she said that basically everything about him was he was like, he envisioned the world in a comic strip form. So he had a big problem not understanding, in her words, why an actor can't just fall over, get run over by a truck, and go flat and then pop back up into three-dimensional form. And so she said she was often trying to say, like, Sam, I am a human being. I cannot do everything exactly like you want it done. Like, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And,
but I mean, that's also the type of movies that he's making at this point in his career.
Oh yeah, for sure. But it was just interesting to me to see like somebody, I think this, I don't know, since he's been working with his crew and not like, bigger budget actors, I suppose. I don't know. It doesn't seem like he's had to deal with that kind of pushback before. And,
right.
And it's interesting to me, because I wonder, like, if that's part of what makes this movie work as well as it does, because you had people like Frances McDormand and Liam Neeson in the lead roles, because Liam Neeson's got to be more than he's sizable, so he's a big monster, but also he's got to be very emotional and warm and believable.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think Neeson and McDormand, they were both relatively unknown at this point, but or at least they weren't household names. I mean, like we said, Neeson had done some significant work before this, no starring roles, all supporting roles, and McDormand had gotten an Oscar nomination, but they weren't like movie stars. And in retrospect, they both seem absurdly overqualified for this kind of movie. I mean, both of them would be nominated for Oscars for their performances in other films later on. I mean, McDormand has won 3 Oscars for Best Actress. She's been nominated like 7 times, and she's won 3 Best Actress Oscars. That's insane.
Yeah.
But I think their presence in the film is part of what helps to elevate it, like you're saying. I think they both bring a gravitas to the film that, quite frankly, isn't there on the page. It's not in the script. But because they're both so good, they're able to take these characters who are kind of not caricatures, but they're barely written. They're not like well-written characters. They're not very deep characters, but they're able to take them because and through their performance create sympathy, turn them into sympathetic characters that I think makes their story even more tragic, which is a big part of Darkman's origin.
And I think, they came to this with a different set of tools. It's the difference between studying Tchaikovsky and Shakespeare and Meisner versus Larry Moe and Curly.
Yeah. I don't know who some of those people are that you mentioned.
Right.
Who's Curly?
Yeah. I don't know. Shemp is who we deal with.
Man, I was watching the Three Stooges yesterday, and That shit's funny. I see what Sam Raimi likes about him. They are good.
Back to the Frances McDormand real quick. The part I was trying to think of before I just remembered is that she talks about that, you know, when he cast her as a feminist, and because of the way he had received some kickback for treating as female actors, she took it as like her responsibility to not be, she said, you know, at this time, she was used to the idea that unfortunately, no matter what, as a girl, unless you're the hero of the film, you're going to end up handcuffed or tied up or something at some point. And she didn't want to just totally embrace the damsel in distress
Right.
part. She didn't do it as much as she should have. She says she felt an obligation to not come across as weak in the movie. And like you said, they push back. She says, you know, even they had that and the thing where she's like, I'm not a cartoon. She said she does feel like she challenged him a little too far sometimes than she should have. In fact, on the Shout Factory DVD, a lot of what I'm getting from her is like out of an interview there. And she's only doing it because she said that she didn't even realize Darkman had a legacy or like anything about it necessarily, although she should have figured, because she says, you know, like Sam's stuff usually does have like some kind of cult following. But she was working on another movie, and the makeup artist on there was Christian Tinsley. And she said that while he was doing her makeup, she mentioned, hey, somebody reached out to me about an interview about Darkman. Can you believe that? And then he was like, holy shit, I love that movie. Like that is, I saw that movie when I was 15 years old. And that's one of the reasons I got into makeup effects, like that he had seen it. He said him and his buddy had actually gone to a Comic-Con and bid on and bought the mask that the stuntman wears for Darkman. And won it, and he had the mask and said that they spent hours studying that mask and everything for him to learn to become the thing. So she was like, okay, this is more important than I thought it was, I guess.
No, that's cool. I think you said that was Christian Tinsley.
Yeah,
he was one of Rick Baker's dudes for a while, I think. I wonder what movie it was. I don't know what movie. I don't know. Anyway, we'll look that up later.
Yeah.
We'll look it up later. Anyway, so the role of the film's Heavy went to Dr. Giggles himself, Larry Drake, who at the time was best known for his role on the TV series L.A. Law, which he appeared in from 1987 to 1994.
So that guy, he seems like just he seems like a fun guy. And so I think he relished this role because he said he had always like known he had like a blue collar body and talked like a school teacher. So there was
he says I look like a truck driver and talk like a school teacher is what he says.
Yeah, he said he always knew though that like in acting he'd always be playing big and tough, big and dumb, or big and mean. Those would be like the things he could do. He said one time he remembered being at a party and telling somebody, he's like, I think based on my roles, I have a face for scaring 12-year-old boys. And the lady he was talking to was like, yes, you do. And he was like, you're not supposed to agree with that, but okay, thank you. But he said he just showed up at this thing, like his agent told him about it. He went to it and it was like reading. He said he wasn't even prepared. He was just like holding like the papers in his hand, which he's like, I was just totally winging it. I didn't even like have anything memorized or all of that stuff. He said, but the part he thinks got it for him was the revolving door scene. Like he had done something, and then Sam said, let's
he's
try
playing
this.
Against himself, his own character. Yeah.
And so Sam asked him, like, let's do this. So he's like looking at it, and he said he didn't know what to do, but he was like, fuck it, let's just try it. And so he just like jumped in and he started playing both guys, jumping back and forth. And he said apparently that's what Sam really liked, was his willingness to just jump into it and just do it. And then he felt like he did a good job portraying two different expressions and two different ways of handling it. Like Durant being angry and Darkman being nervous and all of that stuff. So I thought that was kind of cool.
I do like the way that he plays the character though, because he talks about this in interviews too, where he basically tries to make him very like cool and level-headed all the time. Like even when he's doing evil things like cutting a dude's fingers off, he never like plays it up like he's enjoying himself. It's just like business. The only time that you see him getting like emotionally like frustrated or anything is when he's trying to shoot Darkman with the big like 30 caliber explosive things on the helicopter at the end, and it keeps missing. He gets like angry then, but otherwise he's like cool as a cucumber the whole time, which makes him scarier, I think.
Yeah, his whole thing was he was like, I don't want him to. He was like he would be a disengaged from life, I think is how he described it, and he didn't like the mustache twirling villain or anything. He just said that this would be a guy. There's no intrinsic value. He's just mean and just. He's not even melodramatic in any way, just efficient. Like he just was very cool and calm and collected about doing everything. It's funny you mentioned the finger cutting scene too. He said that was like one of the things that like the only thing in the script that concerned him when he was reading about it, because it felt like when he read it, like specifically violent. He said there was something about it that just seemed like, wow. He said he had never done it before, that he was thinking about like, what if some like disturbed teenager somewhere in like Wisconsin goes and gets a cigar cutter and starts to like cut somebody's finger off or something. How I'm going to handle that. And he said, which it didn't happen, luckily. And he said he was actually kind of surprised too, that I don't know if he wasn't familiar with Sam Raimi or not, but he says that, you know, it was kind of cool to see it later that it was like stylized violence. That it's graphic, but it's still fun. And so he likes the way that Sam Raimi handles that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So for the other villains in the film, we have Colin Friels as Strack, which is kind of I guess technically kind of the main villain, even though, because really Larry Drake's character is a glorified henchman who just happens to have his own henchman, you know, right. He's considered the bad guy of the film, but he's working for this the Strack guy. You also had Sam's brother Ted Raimi as Rick. You had Nicholas Worth as Paulie, and Evil Dead 2's Danny Hicks is back as Skip. He's the one-legged henchman, which he's really great in this movie as well. And there's also a handful of really fun cameos in the film. If you're paying attention, you'll see an American Werewolf in London's Jenny Agutter as the burn ward doctor. She's the lead female character in An American Werewolf in London. She's for some reason uncredited in this, even though her role is not really like cameo like. I mean, she gives a lot of very important exposition in her scene. I don't know why she's uncredited. Maybe she was just doing it as a favor to Sam or something. You also had Joel and Ethan Coen. They appear as the driver and passenger in a very familiar looking Oldsmobile Delta 88. Oh, yes. And this is the weirdest one to me. You've got Neil McDonough. You guys know the character actor Neil McDonough.
Oh yeah.
Bill Lustig, director of Maniac Cop. Scott Spiegel, he shows up in all the Raimi's movies, so that one's not surprising. And then Stuart Kornfeld, who we talked about back in our David Cronenberg series, that producer Stuart Kornfeld, he produced The Fly. They all cameo as dock workers in the film, which is just super strange to me. And of course, Bruce Campbell shows up at the very end as Westlake's final disguise. So I guess Bruce Campbell did actually get to play Darkman, but he's credited in the film as the final Shemp. I like that.
Yeah, it's always pretty good. That's a favorite moment of mine is when he turns around and looks to camera and all that stuff. I really like that.
It's almost like a little Easter egg just for Sam Raimi fans.
Yeah,
it really is.
I think so. Like in some of the reviews, I was going through stuff for nap needing people, and but somebody mentioned like seeing Bruce Campbell, and they were like, they didn't know anything about the movie, and they were watching it, and they were like, who even directed this? This feels familiar, but they said like that Bruce Campbell is there at the end, and they're like, Sam Raimi. It's totally Sam Raimi. Like they just knew. Danny Hicks tells like a fun story about Skip, with the machine gun leg, and like the guy breaks it off, and and he's like he hops. He just stands there hopping around for a while, or skipping.
I really like when the other henchman puts his arm out so that he can steady him. Like that's a normal thing for them. That's a good little touch.
Yeah, he said he grabs onto his arm, or whatever. But he said afterwards he had asked Sam. He was like, Sam, this feels like the dumbest thing in the world.
It's real silly.
And Sam Raimi said like, no, trust me, it's going to get a great reaction by the audience. It's perfect. And they said that sure enough it did. Like
it's really great, and it makes sense in that opening scene because they need that deception to get the upper hand. But later on, when he's that when they're using it in a scene later on, and they're still using the gun, the leg gun. I'm like, you guys just could use the regular gun for this scene. Now poor Danny Hicks and poor Skip over here just having to hop around on one foot.
Right.
Like, that was unnecessary. But I really like the henchmen. They are just one prosthetic away from being Dick Tracy villains.
Yes,
every one
I
of
could
them.
see it. Yeah, for sure. Like, especially like they've got unique looks. Like, I mean, besides the fact that Larry Drake looks unique as hell. There's that bald
he
one.
looks like a Dick Tracy villain.
Yeah, there's that bald one too that looks like not a bald one like Alec or Steven. But the one we didn't mention too, Smiley, that's Dan Bell. I just know him really well because I've seen Wayne's World like a million times, and he plays Neil in Wayne's World.
Yeah,
who's Neil?
My God,
he's one of the guys that's with him. He's like he doesn't have a lot of lines or anything, but he's one of the guys that is always there that works on, like, I think he's like the camera operator or something.
Okay.
He had a really funny story too that just I just like these little fun stories that involve interaction with Sam Raimi. Just that he said that the first time when they bust up in the factory at the end with the machine guns and they're just like blasting everything, and he said it was like this whole elaborate setup that they had. Once he starts shooting, like the bin opens and grain starts falling out, like this explosion goes off and this thing, and he said, and the guy hands him the gun, and it's just like, hey, I've got the safety on, just be careful, just don't forget to turn it, take the safety off when you go in, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, of course, I forgot to take the safety off. So they bust in the door, and he just starts going, but nothing's happening. And the safety's off. But of course, all of the elaborate processes start happening. The bin opens, the grain falls out, the explosions start going off, everything starts going. And they're just sitting there like, bang, bang, bang. And he said, like, Sam like had this look on his face. He said he could tell he was very frustrated, but he very like calmly got up and walked over to him and was just like, hey, don't do that anymore.
Well, Todd, I do have to ask you if you had any, because you've had a little bit of luck on our Sam Raimi series so far, a little bit.
It's been slim.
But it's been slim, but there's been a couple here and there. But as far as Darkman goes, because this is a big studio film, so we've got these actors who are, much more experienced than maybe some of the actors in the previous films. Any luck trekking with any of these guys?
I think we double our number, at least our number so far with Darkman. Right off the bat, we got Neil McDonough, aka Dum Dum Duggan. He was in Star Trek First Contact in 1996 as Lieutenant Hawk. He gets assimilated while they're in their EVO suits and tries to like shoot Picard and stuff. Yeah,
I haven't seen that movie in a long time. So
it's such a good one.
It's a good one.
Then we got Cliff Fleming as the police helicopter pilot, and he did some helicopter piloting for Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, and of course,
I was about to ask, like, where the fuck is there a helicopter in Star Trek?
Yeah, I know.
Voyage Home makes sense.
There you go.
And also JJ's first two, 2009 and Into Darkness. He did stuff on those. And then we've got Craig Hosking as another helicopter pilot. He was also in Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013. And then we've got Nathan Jung as Chinese warrior. Now, he was born November 29th, 1946, but he was in Star Trek TOS, the OG.
Whoa.
Season 3, episode 22, The Savage Curtain. That's from 1969. He played Genghis Khan.
He plays Genghis Khan?
Yeah, he plays Genghis Khan.
Wow.
That's the one where the Enterprise meets Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
His first film was Blind Rage, 1976. It's a martial arts movie.
Blind Rage. Hold on. Blind Rage. They just covered this on Quentin Tarantino's podcast, which probably has a lot more listeners than our podcast, Video Archives. But Blind Rage is about it's about a bank heist by five blind men.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's a bunch of blind dudes robbing a bank.
Wow. But the last thing Nathan Jung worked on was Nathan Jung versus Bruce Lee. It's a 2016 documentary short where he is the narrator. It actually won 3 awards at the Asians on Film Festival. That was in 2016. He passed away just last year, April 24th, at the age of 74. And then we got Aaron Justig as Martin Katz. He was in 2 episodes. He was in an episode of Star Trek Voyager, season 1, episode 7, Ex Post Facto. That's in 1995, which was directed by LeVar Burton. And he was also in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise, season 2, episode 12, The Catwalk, which we covered on episode 33 of Computer Resume podcast, available now wherever you get your podcasts. And then we've got Mr. Nicholas Worth as Paulie. He was born September 4th, 1937 in St. Louis, Missouri. He received a Bachelor's of Fine Art from Carnegie Mellon, and he actually served 3 years in the U.S. Army as a paratrooper. But his first film was a small uncredited role, but was in For Pete's Sake in 1966. And then he was in Don't Answer the Phone in 1980 as Kirk Smith. And I got this quote here from Nicholas about it. And he said, "Some people at church said, 'How can you do this film being a Christian?' And I said, 'We don't live in a Pollyanna society. God called upon me to act, and I have to present the world as it is.'" And of course, he's talking about his role in that film, which is a deranged, impotent, misogynistic Vietnam veteran porno photographer who brutally strangles young women. But he actually also won an award for that at the Stiges Catalonian International Film Festival. But he was also in a couple of episodes of Deep Space Nine, and a couple those 2 episodes were season 1, episode 14, Progress, and season 5, episode 17, A Simple Investigation. And then he was in a couple episodes of Voyager. It was season 5, episode 12, The Bride of Chaotica, and season 7, episode 10, Shattered, which was his last TV appearance. And he died May 7th, 2007, at the age of 69 in Van Nuys, California. Then we've got Jesse Lawrence Ferguson as Eddie Black, born June 8th, 1942 in the Bronx. His first film was The Onion Field in 1979. And he was in Star Trek The Next Generation, season 1, episode 3, Code of Honor, 1987. And then he was also in John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness in 1987. He was also in The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. That was in 1984. Boys in the Hood in 1991, directed by John Singleton. And he passed away April 26, 2019, at the age of 76. And he is survived by his son, Jace. And then, of course, we have Mr. Larry Drake as Robert G. Durant. He was in Star Trek Voyager, season 7, episode 5, Critical Care. That was in 2000. And that's everybody in Star Trek.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Well, Larry Drake, is that character like an alien?
It's been a while since I've gone through Voyager, but they're out there by themselves in the Delta Quadrant, so I gotta assume that's some sort of alien.
Yeah, I just looked it up. He's definitely an alien of some
Oh,
sort.
okay.
Yeah, he's got some weird stuff going on his forehead.
Classic.
Nice. Classic Star Trek. Make them an alien, put some weird shit on their forehead or their
ears. It's either on their forehead, on their ears, or on their nose. And there you go. You got an alien.
Well, with his biggest cast, biggest crew, and biggest budget yet, Raimi began principal photography on Darkman in Los Angeles, California. And filming on this took place almost entirely in real locations, including a local hospital and in Chinatown, where they filmed several stunt chases and dangerous drops from tall buildings, which we will get to in a minute. But one of the most ambitious sets in the film was Darkman's lab, his lair. To create this set, the crew found an enormous warehouse in downtown LA that had been originally used as a refrigerated food warehouse. And with the help of production designer Randy Sir, the warehouse was converted into stages. It was an enormous set. I mean, this building is huge. We're not talking like James Cameron, Titanic huge, but a very, very big set. In fact, the furnaces that you see in there, those were built. Those were not part of the original warehouse. They were built by the crew, and they were over 2 stories tall.
Jeez.
Yes, this is big. So, we have talked about this a lot on Sam Raimi, but he often has very complex, very ambitious camera shots, very wild movements that you don't see from other filmmakers. So to plan all of these on a set like this, Randy Sir actually built a scale miniature of the warehouse set And then they built 2-scale miniatures of the camera cranes themselves. They've got the scale model of the set and the cameras. And that actually allowed them and allowed Raimi to choreograph how these cameras would move in the real world throughout the set. And by doing that, this whole process, it allowed them to know which parts of the set might need to be hinged or movable once the actual construction took place. So it's really great planning on their part, and you really have to on a Sam Raimi movie because he's doing some wild shit with it.
That's pretty smart. Honestly.
Yeah, because his camera, especially in the warehouse, but really in the whole movie, his camera is flying everywhere in this movie.
You know what's crazy about it though is like when you hear him talk about it, some is you know, if you're used to watching the Sam Raimi stuff we've already talked about, is you got like the demon vision and all of that with the shaky cam and that sort of stuff that he was doing. He does talk about being very aware that this is more real world and real people. You kind of said that, but it's like he is very concerned with the camera work being different than like in Evil Dead or something like that. He said
it fits the movie more.
Yeah, because it what's the word? Ethereal demon stuff is what he called it, I think. You know, you get the vision of the demon. It's easier than the people explaining what's happening, that you get like you could just show them instead of telling them. But, you know, if you get too playful in this kind of movie, he says it can come across really gimmicky. So you've got to
showy.
Balance. Yeah.
I mean, it's still pretty showy, to be honest.
Right.
Maybe not quite.
I didn't say he succeeded. I'm just saying that's what he said.
Because he does some weird shit in this movie. So in order to pull off these insane camera moves, once they got to shooting in the real world with real cameras, Raimi needed a great cinematographer. Now, Universal insisted that the film not look like Evil Dead, so they didn't want Raimi to use any of his previous DPs. They wanted somebody new to come in. This is kind of like a typical studio move. Like, we're going to, this is your first big studio movie. We're going to have to exert our power over you just a little bit by saying you're not allowed to have your previous DPs. It's something you see a lot with first-time filmmakers working for a studio, or first-time studio films, I should say. So Raimi goes out looking for a new cinematographer. He asked Barry Sonnenfeld. He knew Sonnenfeld because of his connection to the Coen brothers. Sonnenfeld, who, of course, later becomes a director. He did, Men in Black, Wild Wild West, and stuff like that. But he started his career
the classics.
The classics. He started his career as a director of photography. He was the DP on the Coen brothers' Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, and Miller's Crossing. So Raimi approaches him. Sonnenfeld's not available for whatever reason. He's probably working on Miller's Crossing, actually, because it's around the same time. But Sonnenfeld recommended Bill Pope. Of course, we all know Bill Pope pretty well. We talked about him a lot during our series on the Wachowskis because he had been the cinematographer on Bound and on the first 3 Matrix films. But at this time, Pope was a music video cinematographer. He had done a lot of music videos, but he had never shot a feature before. Darkman would actually end up being his first film. So another challenging piece of design that Randy Sur had to tackle was Westlake's skin-making machine. See, Raimi wanted this machine to be able to be shot in a way where we see it function through the entire skin-making process without cutting, which is a big ask. The result is a sort of hybrid of computer, photocopier, hologram, and skin mold. The skin mold was modeled on those pin molds that we used to all buy at the mall back in the 90s, at like Natural Wonders or wherever. And if you guys were like me, you probably like put your finger in it shooting a bird and then left it there.
I always tried to do it and then tried to open my eyes, and it was like, look, and Mom was like, stop that.
It's very difficult, but if you watch this film and you see the skin mold that they're using, it is 100% just a giant one of those things.
Yeah.
But to combine all of these elements in a way where Raimi could shoot it without having to edit, Sur decided that he would go not the route of movie magic, but of just regular old magic, which, of course, we know is near and dear to Sam Raimi's heart. So I'm sure that he loved that. And Sur actually went to the people who built David Copperfield's magic axe and explained.
Wait, what?
Yeah, David Copperfield, the guy who made the Statue of Liberty actually disappear in real life.
It's real, Justin. It's real.
An illusion, Todd. It's an illusion.
Damn it!
David Copperfield is not an actual wizard, Todd.
Uh,
We just broke Todd's entire worldview. That is too bad. So Randy Sir goes to these guys, and he kind of explains to them how he wanted the illusion to work. And then with the information he got from them, he was able to build the device and have it function the way that Raimi wanted. Now, I could not find any information on how it worked, and that might just be the magic illusion, not giving away your secrets kind of thing. So I'm not really sure.
You can't give it away. I just thought this was fun because David Copperfield has also been in my life recently. Again,
like you've been
hanging out with him regularly. No, we
have an awesome life, Gary. We get it.
No, I wasn't hanging out with David Copperfield, but we do have a character in the NWA called Magic Jake Dumas, and he's like a disgruntled magician. And
I love it.
He's fun. He's a really.
I think
cool...
all magicians are a little disgruntled. Let's be honest.
He does seem like he's like a drunk, like pissed off, like he smokes a cigarette on his way to the ring, and he's like just pissed off. But sometimes he wins his matches with deceptive tactics, like he'll pull out of like a string of handkerchiefs and choke somebody out, and when the ref goes to look for it, it's disappeared.
Oh, I love that.
God, that's awesome.
I love that. I can't believe nobody's done that gimmick before now.
Yeah,
or maybe just not successfully.
But so like I've been watching because like for some reason it randomly came up, and me and this guy have like hung out. He even has an assistant. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen her recently on the stories, hanging out on Bourbon Street, and we got her a snake and made it that like that was him, and she forgot the spell to turn him back or something. Because sometimes the thing they find fun is like he can't get the trick right, but she's magical. Like somehow, like because all she does, she's great. She just stands there and does the like presentation thing, like ta-da, like no matter what's happening, even if like he's trying to do a trick and somebody beats the shit out of him, she's still like, ta-da.
She's still doing her job.
That's great. So great.
That's good.
But anyway, I started looking for stuff for him one time, and I remembered like as a kid watching David Copperfield stuff. So I was sending him things like, dude, you should totally do this. One of them was like a David Copperfield trick. Like, remember the things where you'd like look at the screen and he would be like, I'm going to show some cards on the screen, and pick a spot and go this many spaces to the right, and then go this many back and blah blah. You're not here, you're not going here. I was like, you could totally do that to like pick your opponent or something, have the audience like do the like walk through the thing. Anyway,
that's so great.
But so I've been sending him like David Copperfield clips. It was unnecessary for this show, but I just thought I'd share.
Thank you, Gary. So they get this contraption made thanks to the David Copperfield's people. And in the end, when they shot it, they actually only had to cut at one point. When the face is pushed out and you take out the new face that Darkman's going to apply, they had to cut that to put the new face inside of it because they couldn't just actually make it appear. Otherwise, the machine operated exactly as we see it in the film, which allowed Raimi to shoot the entire process from multiple cameras, and then he could kind of edit the scene as he saw fit.
What am I? Some kind of a circus freak? Is that it? Is that it? Some kind of a freak? Maybe I should be wearing a funny little hat. Do you like it? Yeah? See the dancing freak. Pay $5 to see the dancing freak. Only $5 to see the dancing freak.
Now, we mentioned some jumps from tall buildings earlier. Let's get back to that, because we always like to talk about the stunts and the stuntmen on this show.
Yes.
Well, one of the most dangerous sequences to film in Darkman was the one where Durant, the film's villain, pushed Paulie, that's his henchman who he thinks is stolen from him, but it was actually Darkman, pushes him out of a 9th-story window. And this scene was filmed in a real hotel in downtown Los Angeles, where a stuntman really went out of a 9th-story window on a blind jump, meaning he's, he kind of has to run through the window and can't see where he's going until after he's already in the air, and then landed on a bag some 90 feet below. And it's an incredible stunt to watch in the film, really. I mean, anytime I see somebody falling from a building like that in a movie and it's clear that it's a real person, they didn't like throw a dummy out of the window, I'm incredibly impressed because I know there's a bag at the bottom, but even then, you're falling 9 stories out of a building.
Yeah, you're
even
still
with
falling.
a bag, you have to know exactly what you're doing. And the man overseeing this and the film's other dangerous stunts was stunt choreographer Chris Doyle. Doyle has a long history as a stuntman and later stunt choreographer, dating all the way back to the late 1970s. He'd been a stuntman on films like The Hills Have Eyes 2, Trancers, which of course is a movie that I will bring up any chance that I get, and A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. He had his first gig as a stunt choreographer on a TV series called Riptide in 1985, and he would go on to work on films like Blind Fury, not to be confused with Blind Rage, the movie we talked about earlier. Blind Fury is the one with Rutger Hauer as the blind Vietnam vet who has a samurai sword. Really fun movie. Dead Heat, another really fun movie with Joe Piscopo fighting zombies, I think.
Yeah, it 100% is. Yeah.
Joe versus the Volcano, Maniac Cop 2, and Kindergarten Cop.
Nice.
So this is legit. It's not like when RoboCop throws that one dude out of the window or shoots
and
him
it
out
just
the window.
Is, and his legs are really way too long.
Yeah.
No, they really threw a guy. Oh, they didn't throw a guy. A guy jumped out of a window as Paulie. So one of Doyle's biggest challenges on Darkman, though, was the big finale, which takes place on a helicopter flying over Los Angeles with Darkman hanging on by a long cable and hook. Another incredible stunt in this movie because it's very clear that it's a real dude. I mean,
I haven't seen this movie in forever, and when I saw that stuff, like I was like, "Wow, this is way more of a blockbuster than I remember it being."
Because we talked about that, about how big a deal that was on True Lies. Remember, we talked about how big a deal that was that they had someone just hanging from. Granted, they had someone hanging from a helicopter, and then they were scooping a woman out of a moving limo. It's a little more elaborate than this, but it's still a guy hanging from a helicopter, a real helicopter, real guy. In a real city, like they're in downtown Los Angeles. Like they couldn't fake this, not if they wanted it to look right. So they just really did it. And the sequence took 2.5 weekends to complete, partially because they were only allowed to film on Saturdays and Sundays. They were only allowed to film on the weekends, just because of where it was, because it was literally like the downtown bustling business area of Los Angeles. Yeah. So they hooked the stunt double, a guy named Terry James, to the helicopter by 2 cables. 2 cables, because if one broke or something, then he would have another one and wouldn't fall to his death. And then the pilot could actually speak to James. He would say things like, hey, we're going to go up. Hey, we're going to make a dive. We're going to give this another pass, just to kind of give him a heads up on what was going on so that he could compensate however he needed to. But James could not communicate back to the pilot, which made things a little bit difficult for him. Yeesh. And this is an incredibly physically demanding stunt, not only because of the danger involved, but because once the camera, in between takes, he's just kind of dangling there, which is dangerous on its own. But once the camera started rolling, James had to kind of flail his arms and legs to make it look believable, like he's struggling, And then after the first weekend of shooting, it was pretty clear that this was too much. Like it was just too physically demanding for one person to do over and over and over again. So they brought in a second stunt double, a guy named Chuck Burton. And the final product that we see in the film features both of these men in the Darkman attire. So both of them are doubling, so from shot to shot.
Wow. One
of the final sequences that was shot was the final confrontation between Darkman and Strack on the top of an unfinished construction site. And it seems like a simple scene on paper. They're just walking across these beams and stuff, but Bill Pope actually tells some really fun stories about this. He's like, we would not do things this way now because there'd be safety people on the ground. We're just up there on these beams, no harnesses, nothing tying us down. We're just standing up there with a camera, The sequence actually, it required nearly every technique that had been used on previous sequences in the film. The 3-story tall set was built inside of an enormous airplane hangar at the Van Nuys Airport. In fact, it was actually the hangar that had been constructed to house the Spruce Goose, if that tells you how big it was.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, one of the biggest airplanes that have ever been built.
Yeah.
For the background on the set, they used what they called translights. There was this company that made these things called translights, which are basically giant slides that you light from behind. So instead of using like a green screen, they actually put giant, I don't know if they were glass or if they're probably like plexiglass or something. These giant slides that they would light to make it look like there's a city in the background. And at the time, their 120-foot translight was the largest ever used in Hollywood, although Ghostbusters 2 beat that record not long after. The two movies were filming at around the same time. The sequence also used highly detailed scale miniatures. We're using a lot of miniatures on this movie. Bill Mesa's intervision process, and several of what Mesa describes as after composite shots, which are basically like they film a scene with actors or whatever, and then they project those scenes inside of a miniature. So like if you're looking at the miniature from the outside, you'll see the actors inside of it, which I've seen in other movies before, but it's a really cool process, I think.
Yeah.
As we go into like basically about the release and everything, one thing I wanted to mention is like the Sam Raimi interview I saw was like, and he doesn't give many of these, so it's just interesting to see him talk sometimes about a film. It's like in the middle of like still making the movie. I think he's very upbeat as far as Sam Raimi goes in The Thing, and he talks a little bit about the studio stuff, about how it's interesting for him. They're asking him, what's different about this versus low budget and everything. He was just like, well, one thing is like, we can't be tasteless. We have to recalibrate like how we handle a lot of things that I'm not used to. I guess here is where I have to decide. He's like, he realizes now he's going to have to start deciding if a movie is better if it's independently released or studio level. So he's looking at Darkman and he says, it's a guy does good, a hero and stuff like that. It just feels like a good studio movie. So he seems very happy about it. But at one point in the conversation, somebody says something like, are you, what does it feel different or anything? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I guess a little bit. He says, quote, I was an independent filmmaker and now I'm a boy of the studio. I have no control over my life. And I just thought, nice. And I just only thought that was relevant for the release was a little more troubled than I think he expected at that point.
Yeah. There's a reason that Raimi does not talk about this movie a lot. The interview you're talking about, you said it's like during the filming, right? So he doesn't know what's going to happen. But yeah, Raimi, if you watch, I think me and Gary both watched this on the Shout Factory Blu-ray, and Raimi is not anywhere on there in the retrospective interviews, commentaries, even that Hollywood Reporter 30th anniversary, oral history. Raimi declined to participate. He just doesn't. This movie is kind of a sore spot for him, and a large part of that is because what happens in post-production and release. Well, not release necessarily, but leading up to the release. And there were a few snags during this process, during the post-production process, that had to be handled before the movie could be put in front of audiences. First off was the film's editor. So the studio assigned an editor named David Stiven. David Stiven spent 8 weeks assembling a rough cut, only for Raimi to find out that this guy was completely ignoring the director's storyboards. Remember, Raimi is really big on his storyboards. He knows exactly what he wants a movie to look like. It's all in his head. He knows exactly where this is supposed to go. So an editor, I think you actually talked about this last week a little bit, Gary. The editor basically just has to go by his storyboards, and then that's your movie. It should be an easy gig for an editor, but this guy wasn't going by the storyboards at all. He was actually trying to cut the film like it was a romance. He was enhancing the romance parts of it, which obviously is not the movie that Raimi is intending to make. And reportedly, Stiven actually had a nervous breakdown and said, I can't do this, and left the project.
Jeez.
So later, an editor named Bud S. Smith was brought in by the studio, by Universal. So when Universal held preview screenings, things were not looking great for Darkman. Apparently, people were laughing at all the wrong places and were complaining about the lack of a happy ending. Universal told Raimi that some viewers rated Darkman the worst film they'd ever seen, and some Universal executives told Raimi that it was one of the worst scoring pictures in Universal Studios history.
Wow.
Jeez.
Yeah, which sounds like an exaggeration, though I don't know why an executive would tell him that as an exaggeration unless you're just being a real dick.
Yeah.
But then they had a couple more screenings that were a little more positive. This was after some additional editing and the addition of Danny Elfman's score, which I fucking love. Danny Elfman's score in this movie. It's so good. But the film was never one that Tapert and Raimi had wanted to make. Rob Tapert would later say, the experience with Darkman was very difficult for Sam and me. It isn't the picture we thought it should be based on the footage we shot and all that. The studio got nervous about some of the wild things in it and made us take them out, which was unfortunate. I mean, they're taking out the stuff that makes a Sam Raimi movie a Sam Raimi movie. Now, obviously not all of it, because this is very much still a Sam Raimi movie, but like, you guys saw Evil Dead 2 and you hired me to do this. So like, this is the movie you're getting. It's kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
Tapert would later say this. I think this was during that 30th anniversary roundtable. He said that Universal told them, there's nothing we can do to save this picture. Let's lock it. So Bud Smith had edited it, still wasn't getting it to where they wanted it. But at a certain point, Universal's just like, fuck it. We're done with like fiddling with this. We just got to get the movie out in theaters. They were basically just giving up on it and releasing it so they could wash their hands of it and be done with this movie.
Yeah.
And I meant to say too, Danny Elfman apparently even threatened to like remove his name from the movie at this time. I mean, not that Danny Elfman, like Joe LaDuca was Sam Raimi's guy.
Yeah.
But
I don't think that was because he didn't like the movie. I think that was actually an act of solidarity with Sam Raimi. The way,
well, that's what I meant because of this. Yeah,
it wasn't like this movie sucks, I don't want my name associated with it. It was him showing solidarity with Sam Raimi and not wanting to be credited and paid for his work on the film because it wasn't the movie that they set out to make.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, him and Danny, I mean, obviously are going to be buddies because Spider-Man's coming up eventually and stuff. But it was because when like Sam Raimi, like I guess went on vacation, or whatever, and then this whole editing process goes through, and he threatened to remove his name from everything.
Yeah, of course, Tapert and Raimi are understandably very disheartened by this whole situation. But then Raimi spoke to an editor, a guy named Bob Murawski, who told him there's a much better movie than what we're locking right now. He's like, this can be fixed. So the decision was made to recut the entire movie. Murawski, Tapert, and Raimi spent 48 hours recutting it and restoring things that they thought they were important. They ended up adding 9 minutes of the movie back in. Of course, they also restructured some things here and there. A lot of that stuff in that 9 minutes were things that the preview audiences had not liked, but that they knew were part of what made the film unique. And then they locked the film without telling anyone, without telling Universal. They edited the film and locked it. And by the time Universal knew about it, they had already done the sound mix. And the negative with the new sound mix, with the sound mix and the new edit had already been cut, so there was nothing that the studio could do about it.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a real ballsy guerrilla style move, honestly, and I love it. To his credit, Rob Tapert says when he's talking about this, he says, Bob and I advocated very strongly for the deception. Sam, left to his own, probably would not have done that. He's not that kind of guy, but I am. That's a good fucking producing partner for you,
Yeah,
there you go.
He's willing to piss people off to get the movie made the way it needs to be made, and I love that. Well, of course, Universal's chairman, a guy named Tom Pollock at the time, was furious. He was pissed off that they did this behind his back and didn't tell anybody. But again, by this point, there was nothing he could really do about it. His hands were tied. They'd already scheduled critic screenings, which were going to happen just like 2 days after he found out about it. So there's no time to recut the movie and do a whole new sound mix and everything on it. So they basically just had to release the movie as it was in this form now. Well, when the film was released in August of 1990, a lot of the critics gave it very positive reviews. So, they did something right. One of my favorite reviews that I found on this was from the New Yorker's Terrence Rafferty, because I think that he really gets what Sam Raimi is trying to do here. I'm going to read a quote from his review. He says, Raimi works from inside the cheerfully violent adolescent male sensibility of superhero comics as if there were no higher style for a filmmaker to aspire to, and the absence of condescension is refreshing. The film's graphic style is all bright colors, high contrast, and skewed angles. Its narrative is breathlessly speedy. Its emotions are basic, mostly greed and revenge. And its dialogue is so crude and punchy that you can practically see the exclamation points. And I think that completely nails what this movie is.
Yeah.
Because and some of those lines in that review could be seen as negative in a different light, but he's saying that, even like the dialogue is crude and punchy. That's something that some critics would say as a criticism, but he's clearly like, it's comic book dialogue.
Yeah.
You could practically see the exclamation points. People Magazine's critic Ralph Novak was less enthused. He called Darkman a loud, sadistic, stupidly written, wretchedly acted film, and the most boring movie since Raimi's 1983 horror film Evil Dead, which persuaded some misguided souls to let him first do a sequel and then this relatively costly number. So it sounds to me like Ralph Novak might need a nap.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, when you get a movie like this, you're going to scour the internet, and you're going to find people that definitely need a nap. How about Wild Hal, who says it's Razzie worthy? This movie deserves to be skipped. It's loaded with plot holes, devoid of logic, shady effects, and subpar acting. All actors, including Liam, were poor, and the story seems to be written by a kid. Don't waste your time on this. Majestically pathetic.
Majestically pathetic. I like that turn of phrase, I'll be honest. That's I don't know how you can be pathetic and majestic, but I like the way it sounds.
Let's see here. How about let's go with Mark a Demore. I don't know. Anyway, says this is absolute drivel. Liam Neeson. No, I love this one because he keeps calling him Liam Neeson. Neesham.
Sure, why not?
Liam Neeson must have nightmares about this thing. One reviewer called it rather profound, but I think he was describing himself. The acting, including Neesham, is dreadful. The script is even worse. At least Neesham had the good sense not to return for the sequel. Do not inflict this flick upon yourself or anybody that you care about.
I don't know how anyone doesn't have fun with this movie. Continue.
Joey Stuka. Title of this review
Joey Stuka.
That's what I felt like too.
That's the voice that you got to read this one in.
Yeah,
we did it on Evil Dead 2. You got to bring your Andrew Dice Clay voice in on this one.
This is a rare blemish on the legacy of an otherwise great director. I think I went Tony Soprano a little bit.
It's okay.
A little Sean Connery.
Yeah. It's
well, I was going for like fucking AJ. Listen to me for a second.
That's actually a pretty good Tony Soprano, Gary.
Mr. Raimi, what went on inside your fucking head? I'm adding the fuckings myself. A great cast.
As you do.
And concept squandered by awful acting, overused cliches, and painfully bad script, while the producers were forced to take a bite out of this fetid turd sandwich. You should not, unless you like that flavor.
Turd flavor?
Yeah.
So his review is, you'll like this movie if you like the taste of shit. That's his review.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Tony Stuco. Joey Stuco.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tony's his dad.
What about Tyler Reese, who says it's the worst action movie he's ever seen? I guess success turned around for Sam Raimi in 2002 and 2004 with the two Spider-Man films. But first, he created this V-like character in this garage of a movie. That's what he says, garage of a movie. I like V for Vendetta, but not Darkman. If you want to see a badly burned vigilante in a mask, see V for Vendetta. Don't see Darkman.
Is that the only reason that he's comparing the two?
I guess so.
They're both vigilantes and they're both burned up.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Jeez.
That's it. Let's see here. This is Rocketeer Raccoon. Darkman is often cited as being the missing link between Sam Raimi's Evil Dead series and his own Spider-Man trilogy. But the truth is, this movie might as well stay forgotten and buried for its own good because it's utter garbage. This movie is an extremely dated mess with bad acting that is way too cheesy, and the story itself is terribly weak, and it's just all over the place. And then there's the cherry on top of this pile of mess, that pink elephant scene, which is by far the most ridiculous scene in the movie, and it's laughingly bad.
is the best goddamn scene in the whole movie.
Fucking elephant.
Take it now. Take it. Take the fucking elephant.
Thomas Christie is going to give us one of the most respectfully like bipolar reviews. I don't know if that's the word. I don't know if that's the word. I don't want to make fun of. I don't want to make light of bipolar disorder. It just feels like it's a little. I can't tell if he's happy or sad. Like with the review,
I can't tell if I'm happy or sad.
Damn, this was a slog. Not that it's too long. It's lean as fuck. Surprised they get through as much plot as they do in that 96-minute runtime. It's just not a good story, in my opinion. It's executed awesomely. Cool makeup effects, shaky but effective green screen, invented camera work. This thing really felt like Draft 1 Spider-Man, and with a Batman score ripoff by Elfman himself. It's almost the exact same. Raimi's films really feel like a cross between Three Stooges and Universal monster movies. This time, it didn't work.
It's like one sentence is praise and one sentence is shitting on the movie.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, what? What? You liked it? No,
Nope.
You didn't like that. Okay. That
like
was
parts
cool,
of
but
it.
you were not a
How
fan
many
of it?
stars did he give it?
He gave it 1 star.
Oh, well, okay. Interesting.
Usually these are 1-star reviews that I find. Finally, we've got Creekery, gave it 1.5 stars, so a little bit above average, who said, extrapolate this dick.
That's your new sign off now. No more may the wings of liberty never lose a feather. It's extrapolate this dick.
Oh my god, I don't know.
Oh man, that was your last one.
That was it.
All right. Well, luckily, despite some mixed reviews from critics, audiences flocked to the film. It came in #1 at the box office on its opening weekend, bringing in about $8 million, and it would later go on to gross nearly $50 million worldwide, which is a considerable hit for 1990. It's not doing Batman numbers, but it's doing pretty good for a movie of its budget. Its success led to 2 direct-to-video sequels released in 1994 and 1996 with Arnold Vosloo, a.k.a. The Mummy. We all know him as The Mummy, replacing Liam Neeson as Westlake. And in at least the first of those 2, Larry Drake returned as Durant. In addition to these sequels, Darkman had its own comic book sequel. There are several Darkman novels. There's a Darkman video game, not to mention like a ton of action figures. I used to have a Darkman action figure. I think it was a Nika action figure, or maybe McFarlane. I can't remember. I don't know what happened to it. I probably sold it. But in 2006, Dynamite Entertainment published a crossover comic book called Darkman versus Army of Darkness, which saw Darkman face off against Bruce Campbell's character from the Evil Dead movies. Have either of you read that comic?
I've looked for it. I think I remember seeing it on the shelf and going, "Oh, I want to get that, but not this time." And
then you just never did it.
Yeah, I just never got it.
Yeah, I would like to read it. I mean, there are a lot of Army of Darkness like crossover comics in that universe.
Oh yeah, there's a ton.
Mm-hmm. In 1992, Universal financed a 30-minute television pilot based on Darkman with British actor Christopher Bowen as Westlake and Larry Drake once again returning as Durant. The pilot was unaired and never got picked up, although you can find it on YouTube, and I did watch it, and it is bad. It's very bad. I'll try to post the link in the show notes to it on YouTube. But Larry Drake talks about it a little bit in his interview on that Shout Factory, and he calls it a presentation more than a pilot, like something that wasn't ever intended to be aired, but more as like something to sell the studio on, I guess. Mm-hmm. And the guy Christopher Bowen, who plays the Darkman character, he's definitely playing like the way he does his voice is a lot closer to Arnold Vosloo's portrayal than Liam Neeson's, because Arnold Vosloo still speaks in his British accent, and so does Christopher Bowen, although Liam Neeson does not speak in his Irish accent or a British accent in Darkman, so I'm not sure why that decision was ever made in the sequels.
It's a little confusing why they made those choices. Weird.
Yeah, Larry Drake talks about that, and just how it has succeeded in original video sales, like the original Darkman. So they made that sequel, and then
Yeah, we talked about like Darkman did well in the theaters, but it did really well on video, just like all of Raimi's previous films.
Yeah, and he said they went and watched the sequel at the Hitchcock Theater, and Sam wanted him back. He was like basically Sam's parents were there or something. And they were raving about him. We're like, we love Durant. He's so cool. And like Sam Raimi's like, all right, well, we got to get you back. And he's like, well, you've blown me up twice now. And, he's like, that's it. He's like, it's a cartoon. We can bring you back. It's fine. He's like, well, I want to come back as a brain in a jar or my twin sister or something.
Very ugly twin sister.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what led to that little presentation or whatever. Apparently, they're going to do a TV series.
To be honest, looking at it as a potential TV series in a different set of circumstances, the formula is kind of like Doctor Who. They've created this character who has this particular element that allows him to look like anyone.
Yeah.
So you can rotate through actors,
That's true, because like even though in the movie and including in the sequels, like Westlake creates a mask to mimic his own face, his face before he got injured. You could really you could write in a reason for him to not, like, maybe he's a fugitive or something and he can no longer look like himself, so he has to create a whole nother mask, and then you could recast the role if you needed to.
I mean, as
it's
much
honestly
as
not a bad idea for a TV show. Like a Darkman TV show could definitely be really good if it were done right, I think.
Yeah, I think maybe because I just, we just covered Doctor Who on Computer Resume, but that hit me and I was just like, oh man, this could have been a really big thing.
Yeah. I mean, they're talking about doing a legacy sequel to this as well. I mean, earlier this year, just a few months ago, Liam Neeson said that he'd be interested in doing a legacy sequel, which would be kind of like Halloween 2018, where it ignores the part 2 and part 3, and there's just a sequel to Darkman, where Darkman for the last 30 years has been running around as a superhero. It could be like the Dark Knight Returns of Darkman. The Darkman Returns.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, could be cool. And so apparently Neeson is interested, and Raimi has started talking to Universal about the possibility of producing a sequel to Darkman. So
that's awesome.
We'll see if that actually happens, because these
take my
kind of
fucking money.
And Liam Neeson's not getting any younger. I mean, he's pushing 70 now, I think, right? So
yeah.
Well, before I go off on my own tangent about how much I love this movie, I actually want to give the floor to Todd. Because, okay, me and Gary and Todd, we're all big comic book fans. I think it is safe to say, though, that of the three of us, Todd is the biggest comic book fan. I don't think any of us would argue that. I mean, it's not a compliment. It's just
you're the bigger.
I'm taking it as such, Justin. I don't get many compliments on the show, so I'm taking that.
Well, I do know for a fact that Todd has been stoked about us talking about Darkman ever since we even started talking about the possibility of doing a Sam Raimi series, which I think was like something we've had planned since we started this podcast 2 years ago. Of course, Darkman isn't based on a comic book, but it feels like it's based on a comic book. So then I have to ask you, Todd, what is it about Darkman, as a fan of comics and as a fan of superheroes? What is it about Darkman that appeals to you?
It ticks so many boxes. It's just kind of, if you're into kind of some gruesome horror type stuff with like really unique looking gooey type prosthetics and effects and stuff like that, this is your movie. If you dig the revenge superhero type thing, this is your movie. If you dig just big over the top performances, this is your movie. Do you like stunt work? This is your movie. Like, you want a comfort movie? Oddly enough, this is your movie. It's, I mean, my wife will tell you the story of
my wife.
When she and I first got together and we moved in together, this was a white noise movie for me. She had never seen it. And I was like, hey, do you mind if I put on a movie? It helps me go to sleep. And she's like, yeah, sure. And I popped in Darkman, and the first scene is the dude getting his fingers
She's
cut off.
like, how the fuck do you fall asleep to this?
Yeah, she goes, what the fuck is this movie?
And she still married you.
And the funny part is, after that scene, she turned to say that to me, and I was already asleep. Like,
That's funny.
This is one of those ones, I've mentioned it a bunch, that a lot of my movie viewing as a kid was done on television. My family wasn't big on going to the theater. We didn't have enough money for any of the premium channels or anything like that. So I saw this probably with commercials, formatted to fit my screen, that sort of thing. But I just fell in love with it. It's a little bit of The Shadow. It's a little bit of Batman. It's a little bit of comedy. It's a little bit of horror. It's a lot of bit of action. And man, it's so great. I have one more personal story connected to this film. And I mean, it's not really any, thing, too shocking or anything, but like, I remember I was at one of my first jobs. I was working at the YMCA, and I got like a really bad cold. I'm totally congested. My voice dropped like 3 octaves. It was bad. And one of our members came in and he goes, ooh, you sound pretty rough. I was like, yeah. He goes, you need some rock and rye. And I was like, I don't know what that is. He goes, go to the liquor store, ask him for rock and rye. And I said, okay, fine. So I actually worked the early shift at the YMCA. So my shift was done at 10 a.m. So I walked into the liquor store looking like a raging alcoholic who's like, I gotta have rock and rye. But I went up to the guy. I was like, hey, do you have rock and rye? And of course he heard my voice. He goes, ooh, you have a cold? I said, yeah. He goes, listen, I'm going to tell you how to prepare this thing. And he walked me through the steps, and I went home with a pint and did exactly what he told me. And I was like, well, I'm going to sit here and drink this. And while I'm sitting here drinking this, I popped in DARKMAN, and of course drank the entire pint of rock and rye. So and again, I was pretty young and didn't drink a lot. So by the end of the movie, I'm hammered drunk.
Honestly, the best way to watch this movie.
Yeah. But in my own mind, and I had started like doing some creative writing and stuff like that. So as I'm watching this, I was like, oh, this could be a really big thing. And I started coming up with backstories for all the henchmen and like all the different routes that this thing could have gone, and expanding this universe. And those were the thoughts as I face planted into bed, and woke up about 4 hours later feeling like $1 million. Like my cold was gone, and I had some great ideas for DARKMAN.
It's so weird that rock and rye was such a thing. Like, I remember my parents, who I grew up in a fairly strict evangelical household, and they did not drink, and still to this day do not drink. Yeah. And there was still always rock and rye just in case somebody got a cold.
Yeah, I remember moving here. When I first moved here, I got sick, and my dad gave me rock and rye. It's super weird.
Is that a Southern thing, or is that like a thing everywhere?
To be honest, like, I mean, I don't know if it was like specifically Mr. Boston's, but if you go and like Google image search, you can find prescriptions that doctors wrote their patients
with rock and
rye.
Oh, it started in like the late 1800s. I remember looking this up one time. It was like pharmacies stocked rock and rye.
Yep. For
colds. It was taxed less than regular liquor too, because it was considered,
pharmacies stocked cocaine at one point too. So.
Well, I'm just saying. So like their profits were like off the chain, because they were just like, they didn't have to pay as much tax or anything on it, because it was like medicinal. And
listen, I'm going to do a video.
It does
I'm going to do a video probably this coming week.
I feel like it's definitely like a placebo.
I don't know, dude. Like the way I did it, like I ended up like sweating a lot, because I mean it's a whole pint of like pretty strong alcohol.
Yeah.
But I combine it now with I'll drink that, but I'll also eat like a bunch of really spicy spaghetti, and like the spice like opens me up, the whiskey dries me out.
Wow,
listen, I'm sure certain things help symptoms. First of all, a cold is a virus, so nothing kills it.
Right, right, yeah.
Let's fight against symptoms. Yeah,
we have not.
But
listen, Cinema Shock guys have not discovered the cure for the common cold.
this is not a. This is we're not giving medical.
We are
advice.
not medical.
No, we are not medically trained professionals. And
but apparently, rock
such.
and rye and spicy spaghetti are the way to get cold.
Well, all right, back to Darkman though. So, but yeah, Todd. I mean, that's kind of, I kind of assumed that this would be something that appealed to you, largely because it does feel like almost like a Batman story.
Very much.
I mean, not his origin, obviously, but he's a very like Batman-esque character. He's by necessity, he is a creature of the night. He has to only go out at night like Batman does.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is
say that, but he definitely puts on those fucking faces and spends a lot of time out during the day.
Yeah, he does. But canonically, he is supposed to only be out at night. That's why
he's called Darkman. But he be walking around in daylight.
He does. The original superhero movie, and what I mean by that is original superhero, like not one that's based on an existing property, are kind of rare.
Yeah,
I mean, there are others. Some of the other ones are good, some not so much. You've got like Meteor Man, which I would put under the not so much category. You've got M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable would be one. The Incredibles, the Pixar movie, The Incredibles.
Yeah.
Blank Man. James Gunn's Super. Hancock, Chronicle. Like there are a lot of them, but for some reason, a lot of these movies get left out a lot of times. They get left out of the conversations during discussions of like best superhero movies. Like you're never going to see, anytime there's a discussion about best superhero movies, you're never going to see Darkman or Super on there, even though they are superhero movies, and that's presumably because they're not based on an existing property and there's no built-in fan base for them,
or they're just not as good. I mean, Super and Darkman are exceptions to that rule.
Yeah, okay. Chronicle's really good. Unbreakable's really good. I mean,
shut up.
There are good movies. There are good ones, and there are a lot of really bad superhero movies too. I mean, prior to Darkman and prior to Tim Burton's Batman, I mean, superhero properties were being sold left and right to like low budget studios. Like Albert Pyun made the fucking Captain America movie. He's, like low budget canon films, that's why so many of them were so bad.
Buddy, let me tell you something, a realization that just hit me just now is that after Batman, which sparked some interest, obviously, it was huge. Superhero, I mean, the Batman trilogy worked fine or whatever. Not trilogy. Well, the quadrilogy. They worked okay, but say that's established franchises. Superhero movies never really took off until Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, right? Like Sam.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think most people credit that and Bryan Singer's X-Men. Those are kind of the.
That's for the current like wave of superhero stuff that we're still seeing now.
I'm just saying, maybe
Marvel.
Sam Raimi helped keep the torch alive for comic book movies.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely. I mean, this is probably a conversation for when we do Spider-Man down the line, but he's definitely highly responsible for what's currently going on in superhero movies. But I mean, Tim Burton's Batman. There were definitely imitators, but nothing else quite gelled other than really Darkman. I mean, there are a lot of other ones, and there are some, like The Crow, things that are based on comic book movies that aren't necessarily superheroes, but they were kind of part of that same wave, I feel like. So there are some here and there, but they never quite caught on the way that these brightly colored, more vibrant superhero movies like we're getting now are.
Do you know in some way, shape, or form, we've mentioned in this podcast, we've mentioned every single movie I have for further viewing.
Well, so I feel like of those movies, the like original superhero movies, the ones that are not based on an existing property, some of them are very good. I mentioned some that I think Super is incredible. I think Chronicle is really good, Unbreakable, but I don't think any of them actually feel like they're with the exception of like the Incredibles, the Pixar movie is the exception. But I think most of them don't feel like they're trying to emulate the feel of a comic book. And even the ones that don't do it as well as Darkman does, I don't think. Darkman is trying to make you feel it's not just a superhero movie, it's a comic book movie that just isn't based on a comic book. Like that's what Sam Raimi's going for. Like he's got these crazy shots, like the shot of Darkman shot from like the bottom on the top of a building. Like that's a fucking Batman shot. That's a Batman comic book panel, you know? And he does that throughout the movie where he's trying to make shots that look like they're part of a comic book, even though this isn't based on a comic book. Yeah. I would say Darkman deserves to be in conversation of the best superhero movies ever, regardless of the fact that it's not actually based on a comic book. I mean,
there's even that like comic book stuff of like when he's hanging from the helicopter and he runs along the top of that truck, that shot following his feet. Yeah. It's like, that's just that. Yeah. It's I don't know. Anyway, he's definitely got that cartoon sensibility about him.
For sure. Yeah. And Raimi, of course, he grew up as a comic book kid. As we all know, he'll go on to make other comic book movies about a decade after this. But his Spider-Man movies, as good as they were, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. They don't, I think, meld with Raimi's aesthetic in the same way that Darkman does. I mean, there are glimpses of it, especially in Part 2, especially in Doc Ock's big horror movie scene. That's the big Sam Raimi scene in that. But Darkman feels like a Sam Raimi movie, like what we think of as Raimi-esque, beginning to end.
Yeah.
I mean, coming off of Evil Dead 2, Raimi coming off of Evil Dead 2 and going, I'm going to make a superhero, and I'm going to make a superhero whose skin just melts off of his body. Like that just feels right. Like that just feels like the next logical move for the guy who made Evil Dead 2 to go to when he makes a superhero movie, you know? Like this, do you guys feel like this is more Raimi-esque than his later superhero movies?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's enough Raimi-isms, even small in part, in Spider-Man and certainly in Doctor Strange, where they are specifically superhero movies. But you kind of have to look a little bit closer to get those Raimi-isms. When
certain scenes like the Doc Ock scene or the zombie stuff in Doctor Strange, they almost stick out a little bit more within the surrounding movie, because the rest of the movie doesn't feel as much like the guy who made Evil Dead made this movie.
I even say that for the original too. Like I was just thinking of Green Goblin stuff, like the sleep, or I don't know, just like the weird scenes with Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin, where like now after watching so much Sam Raimi, I'm like, man, it really is like you can tell Sam Raimi's in there, but that some people watching it outside of that context might be kind of like, that's a weird.
It's a weird moment.
Weird choice. Yeah.
And we keep calling Darkman a superhero, but he's not exactly a superhero in the way that we normally think of superheroes.
Right.
Because Darkman is a pretty hard R action movie. I mean, it is gruesome. Like his makeup alone would not be allowed in most PG-13 movies unless it's a Marvel movie, because the stuff in Doctor Strange is pretty gruesome as well, but they get by because they are a $1 billion company and they can do whatever they want with the MPAA, but we won't get into that right now. Same thing with Christopher Nolan's Batman movies. Those are R-rated movies that got a PG-13 rating 100% because they're Batman. Anyway, but Darkman, the main character is not really trying to like protect the innocent or serve justice. At least not until the end credits roll, when he kind of accepts his destiny or whatever. But prior to that, Darkman is just on a roaring rampage of revenge. The only person that he cares about protecting is Frances McDormand's character. He doesn't wear a cape. He never even goes by the name of Darkman. He doesn't name himself that until the very last scene of the movie.
It's the very last word. Yeah.
His little voiceover at the very end.
Unless you watch the opening Blu-ray title scene, like the menu page, because
I don't think that counts as part of the movie, Gary. So I guess the question for y'all then is Darkman a superhero?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Or is he just a vigilante?
I was gonna say,
because he also murders the shit out of people.
Yeah, that
vigilante
was going to be the other
accurate
thing. I think it's a distinction of
He does have superpowers though.
Right.
He doesn't feel pain. He can change his face, and he's got enhanced strength.
Yeah. I think this is another discussion. I think that could
and again,
be
Batman doesn't have any superpowers either. So
exactly. I think
I'm happy for us to turn the bonus episode into a discussion on what's a superhero.
I think it could be its own bonus episode that, because it's a deep discussion of like you could take the mainstream heroes and classify them out, because Batman's considered a superhero, but he's not super powered. So is he?
And the Punisher is definitely not a superhero.
Exactly. The example I was thinking of is the Punisher.
Exactly.
Wouldn't, I guess he's not. So,
and let's not forget, acting outside of the law is a form of vigilantism, which is a felony. So,
yeah,
from
they definitely
from your paralegal expert.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but they definitely play into that a little bit in the sequel, where like they're investigating this vigilante, and in that pilot, actually, in the opening scene of that pilot, they're showing police like investigating a crime scene where Darkman's taken out Durant's goons, and there are like whispers of this Darkman, kind of like a very, very Batman-esque in that way.
Yeah.
All right, so earlier in this episode, I praised the performances of Liam Neeson and Frances McDormand. I think their performances are very important to the film's overall success. For proof, check out the Neeson-less sequels, where Darkman is barely a character at all.
Yeah.
But make no mistake, regardless of like how good they are, this is Sam Raimi's movie. Darkman presented him a chance to show off in ways that he had never been able to before because of its budget. And he does it like from the get-go with that warehouse scene that opens the movie, which has it's almost like Raimi's like, all right, I gotta triple the budget I've ever had before. Let's start this movie with a scene that has a shootout and cars flipping over and explosions, and then it all ends with the bad guy chopping a dude's fingers off with a cigar cutter. Like, he's like, I'm going to go all out on this opening scene and just show you guys the ride that you're in for. Like, it's fun. It's nasty because, I mean, it's very violent because of the finger cutting thing. But speaking of nasty, let's talk about my favorite scene in the film. I mentioned it earlier, but it's the carnival scene. One of Gary's reviews hated this scene, but I love this scene. This is like the Sam Raimi school of filmmaking in this scene. I feel like it's wild. He's got like this weird sideshow freak that's there for no real reason at all.
He's a freak.
He's just, but it's very complex, like prosthetics on him too.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's got that great Liam Neeson freak out where he bends the carny's finger back, and it definitely looks like rubber. It like looks rubber, but like intentionally so,
and
then of course that iconic "take the fucking elephant," one of the greatest lines in cinema history. And I love he does it in this scene, but he does it in other scenes. This back projection thing that Sam Raimi does.
Yeah,
where it zooms into Liam Neeson's mouth or his eyes. It's got all this wacky stuff going on behind him. He actually did that in Crime Wave a little bit too. Remember, like when the guy's getting electrocuted, and it cuts to the scene where it's like this kind of cartoony, like electrical thing around his head. He's doing the same thing here, but he does it more here than he does in any other movie. But I mean, it's just weird, very weird decisions that I feel like not a lot of directors would do because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it looks cool. It's one of those things. I mean, Darkman is a pretty zany movie overall, but the sheer like slapstick chaos of this carnival scene is just, I think that's just Raimi at his best. Yeah. And then it ends with Liam Neeson's face bubbling off, which is a great way to end the scene, which I love that effect so much. I mean, that actually makes me think, is Darkman a body horror movie?
Ooh.
I mean, it's clearly like got some elements of body horror.
It's got some body horror stuff going on. It really does. I hadn't thought about that until just now. But with the face melty stuff, that's very like Cronenberg-y, that's very body horror.
And I think bringing in the brother to make sure some of the medical stuff holds a little bit of water, and then them going to get David Copperfield's folks so that we can see the process of the machine itself making the thing, I think lends to the legitimacy of what he's doing in his lab. And I think it could easily be qualified as a body horror.
I think so. I mean, it's got body horror elements, I guess is the best way to say it.
One of the things that I saw was that people kept referring to it as operatic, and it was a thought that I had in my head. And if you listen to a couple of the lines of dialogue from Liam Neeson, you can it's almost a little musical.
I can see that.
What is it about the dog? What secrets does it hold? I mean, it's like
very melodramatic. Like
and
you
then
see interviews with. You see interviews with Liam Neeson, he definitely describes it as like part of what interested him was that it felt very operatic. So he was definitely thinking about that.
Which is like Raimi's thing. I mean, that's the same thing that he was going for. Well, when Joe LaDuca was scoring Evil Dead 2,
Jello,
he was going for something very big, and he described that as operatic. Because opera, I mean, I am no opera expert. I've never been to the opera. My opera expertise is pretty low, but it's very exaggerated.
That's from an opera. This piece of art.
I can't see what that is.
That's okay.
Nor can our listeners.
That's okay.
But it's very like over the top, very big, very extravagant, and that's very Sam Raimi. Everything's big and over the top and extravagant, at least on these films. Obviously, he gets into some films later in his career where he reins it in a little bit. But that's what we love about Sam Raimi is that over the top quality,
And here comes another Batman comparison. The final scene in Tim Burton's Batman, I think, was almost ripped from an opera where it's at the top of the church and the whole thing. I think there's a story about Nicholson seeing some sort of opera there in New York, and it was kind of thrown together a little last minute, but that whole once Batman gets to the top of the church, it's very, very operatic. And of course with Elfman's music and yada yada yada.
Well, Darkman I think is great because of what Raimi does with it. It's not great because of its script, because its script is okay. The concepts are fun. The script itself is just okay. And it's not great because of its action sequences, which are mostly pretty rudimentary. I think that Raimi gets a lot better with action later on in his career. I mean, obviously the action scenes in Spider-Man are next level, but here he's like, this is the first time he's really shot like true action scenes, and they're good. They're not bad. They're just not like, we're not like gushing over them like we did on some of the ones on James Cameron's series, because James Cameron is one of the greatest action filmmakers of all time. The science is a little bit silly. The big reveal with Strack is, if you didn't see that coming, you've never watched a movie before. And the explanation of Darkman's powers just like gets dumped as exposition in the hospital scene. This is like, we're just going to explain everything. The climactic helicopter chase has some incredible stunts, but it also has some kind of shitty looking green screen stuff that I don't think has aged particularly well, but it adds to the film's charm in my opinion, because I like that stuff, but I understand when people don't. But what makes Darkman work so well is Sam Raimi, because he's got a very unique style, he's got a very unique vision, and he brings something to Darkman that has never been seen in the superhero genre prior to this, or really after this, even in his own superhero movies. In an essay that he wrote on the film, a writer named Jacob Knight, he was writing for Birth Movies Death, R.I.P., but Jacob Knight's a great writer, and he wrote a little essay about Darkman that I came across, and I think he said it really best when he described Darkman as the product of pure imagination, punch drunk on cinema instead of intellectual property. And that's, I think, something that is I hadn't thought about with this movie, is that Raimi is able to do some shit with the Darkman character that he would not have been allowed to do if he had the Batman or the Shadow or something like that, because there's no baggage. He's just able to run wild and make a Sam Raimi movie.
Yeah, that's a big thing with the comic book movies. I mean, I may be the biggest comic book nerd on the show, but all three of us are very well versed in many of the bigger comic book IPs that are out there, and we go to these films that get produced with some expectations, and it can really it hinders it hinders us as the audience, and it puts shackles on the filmmakers. But yeah, with something like this,
there are only a few
rules,
filmmakers that can, I think, break through that. James Gunn, I think, is one of them.
Right.
Tim Burton was able to do it with Batman, but that's rare, and it wouldn't be able to be done today with Batman, I don't think. Even though, I mean, the last Batman movie that came out is pretty amazing, I think. But a lot of times, like especially in Marvel, they are really shackled, like you said, by the property, so they're not able to really make like they're not able to be an auteur, which is what Sam Raimi is.
Yeah. Well, you're finally seeing, like, I mean, with stuff like Marvel, that it feels like they're starting to open up a little bit more, and it's probably after they've had the success that they've had. So, like Sam Raimi's Doctor Strange, you can definitely get a lot of Sam Raimi in that movie. But,
yeah, they are opening it up a little bit more, and because I think that they've learned a little bit. I think James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy was a big part of that, because he was able to make a movie that fit within the Marvel mold that's still very clearly a very personal James Gunn movie. And then he did even more with, I think, the Suicide Squad, and now he's heading all of DC Films, which good for him.
Yeah,
which is awesome. But for the first while on those Marvel movies, like, they all really did feel the same, and it's because they were trying to make them all feel the same. It was very intentional.
Yeah, and I get it for them. I'm not going to totally crap on them, because it's obviously a formula that worked.
It's working. They're making billions of dollars,
right? So they kept it like secure to what they knew they could get away with. But now, especially since Disney Plus has come along, and you can open yourself up to lots of shows and everything else, they're giving more creative freedom to things. And I'm sure that a guy like Sam Raimi, the only reason he signed on probably was the fact that he could have a little more opportunity with Doctor Strange than he would
working
have
on a very
previously.
big canvas.
You do think back and regret things like this is a whole other podcast again, but like things like an Ant-Man by Edgar Wright or something like that, although those have done fine on their own too. So it's just, a guy like Edgar Wright could bring a lot to the Marvel universe, but it's he probably is the same way. He's like, I got my own voice, I got to get in here. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm everyone and no one. Everywhere, nowhere. Call me DARKMAN.
All right, guys. So I guess it's the time in the show where we get into further viewing. This is where we kind of like pair another movie with, in this case, DARKMAN, the movie we're talking about, with something that would make a good double feature with the movie that's our subject. So let's start with Todd today. What are we pairing, Todd?
I think because this is another one that Justin's not fond of it, but this is just another little gem of a movie that it just warms my heart in the special little places. And I love 1994 The Shadow.
We've already talked about it a couple of times here.
Yeah, it's been mentioned
to be
plenty of times.
Fair, I have not seen it in years, so it might be worth me doing a revisit.
I was going to say, take another look at it, because we've already mentioned, Alec Baldwin. You got Penelope Ann Miller. We mentioned Kindergarten Cop earlier. She plays Dominic's mother.
Oh, I know.
So there's another connection there. Peter Boyle is amazing and hysterical. Ian McKellen.
Oh man, I totally forgot Ian McKellen was in it.
Yeah,
I mean, at the time, I wouldn't have known who he was.
Right. This was obviously long before the X-Men movies, and long before the Lord of the Rings movies and all that. But you've also got Jonathan Winters and Tim Curry. Like it's
what a cast!
It's a really fun movie.
That's a hell of a cast, honestly.
And it kind of, I think if we're talking about DARKMAN and Batman, I think somewhere in the middle is The Shadow, because I think there's a little bit there's more of a polished comic book feel to this, and the look of DARKMAN and the look of The Shadow are almost identical.
yeah
But I mean, you got this really earnest performance from Liam Neeson.
Oh man, I thought you were going to say an earnest performance from Jim Varney.
No. That's a different discussion. But Alec Baldwin, it's Alec Baldwin. Like you can see the funny side, the heroic side, the action side, and it's all in there. It's all in that performance, and I'm on board for it. I think this would be a great double feature.
I'm not going to disagree. I mean, even though, like I said, I have not seen it in many years, I think it's a good choice for a double feature with Darkman.
Give it a second look sometime.
That kind of pulp hero,
Yeah.
I can see that. Maybe I'll rent it or something here soon. How about you, Gary?
Well, I'm gonna say movies that we've already talked about. I would say like RoboCop is one I thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Also, The Crow, and I guess
Crow.
Vaguely, I think may have mentioned this, but also starring Bruce Campbell. Maniac Cop, I feel like would actually kind of interestingly work in here.
Nice.
Yeah, I can see that. Why Maniac Cop?
Well, I don't know. I was thinking of like vigilante. And I know that it's a little more twisted in Maniac Cop, the original, but it just like the guy's murdered. I don't know. I think it was basically just the guy's murdered and comes back, but something about the feeling of that movie, like
his face is all fucked up.
Yeah, but also like I feel like the cinematography, like it's never as big as Darkman by any means, but it feel like I don't know. I just feel like you could watch them back to back and it would feel similar.
I mean, I think the most obvious pick here is Tim Burton's Batman. That almost goes without saying,
Yeah.
It's a dark take on a superhero movie like this, and it's not really afraid to have fun and be a little silly when it's needed, because Tim Burton's Batman is a little silly, regardless of how like goth it wants to be.
Yeah.
Plus, it's got that Danny Elfman score, which I know one of those reviews said it was a ripoff. Darkman's score was a ripoff of Batman, but no, that's just like what a Danny Elfman score sounds like.
Yeah.
That's just his style. But the two do have a similar vibe, even if Darkman, I think, leans into its cartoonishness a little bit more. But
that's fair.
The other ones I thought of, if Batman's a little too obvious, then these are actually some similar ones to what Gary was saying, so we're kind of on the same page. But I thought of Alex Proyas' The Crow, which is another. It's not as fun. It's a lot more serious than Darkman. But it's another dark tale of revenge. But I think they could work as a good double feature. And then the other one, another tale of revenge against the people who created you, just like Darkman. And it's one that Gary mentioned. It's one that we've talked about on the podcast before, but I think Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop and Darkman would make a great double feature. So
I hadn't considered that one, but that is great.
Yeah. So I'm glad that me and Gary are very much on the same page here, because I think Darkman and RoboCop are both very over the top. They're both a little bit silly. They're both a little bit grotesque. RoboCop's very grotesque.
Oh yeah.
In the gore and stuff. And I don't know, they just feel very similar, even though one's set in like modern day LA and the other one's in futuristic Detroit. But thematically and just the vibe just feels kind of the
like
same.
A body horror theme to it too.
RoboCop really does feel like it could be based on a comic book as well, just like Darkman. And of course, both of them became comic books later on.
Yeah, RoboCop was definitely my number one, and it just has that same like the protagonist is like disfigured and like just struggling with their own humanity, and
it's a really good. I think those would make a really good double feature, and of course there are plenty of other ones you could choose from, because there are lots of other things that came from that post Batman glut of superhero movies, like The Shadow or The Phantom.
They both shoot somebody in the dick. No, they don't. But
does Darkman ever shoot? Darkman should shoot somebody. Every superhero movie should feature a guy getting shot in the dick. Well, that's our further viewing segment. So, Gary, before we get into wrap up on this, I know that sometimes you like to give us a little fun fact, Paul Blart style.
Yep.
So, do you have any fun facts that we have not hit on yet for Darkman?
So I feel like we should emphasize a little bit more, because you kind of breezed over it just really quick. The Oldsmobile is in this movie. You mentioned it. Yep. Coen brothers are driving it.
Yeah.
Darkman yells like "Watch out" to it.
Yeah, it's in the
as
scene where he's
hanging from the-
dangling from the helicopter, and he gets, I think he gets like hit into the Delta 88, the classic.
Yeah. And so that's important. But let's see. Dan Hicks, Skip. He doesn't die in the movie, really. Like, you just assume he's finished off. He actually had a whole death scene worked out, and they filmed it. And for some reason, it was lost to the ether. It was basically like Darkman shows up to his room, and I think Raimi steals this line, but he's just like, "Tell me what you know," and he's like, "I've already told you what I know," and he's like, "Let's pretend you didn't," or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, the guy gets thrown, like he talks about, like, they had the whole set where like the walls were turned in the set to like make the floor, because they drop, like he drops the guy through. He drops his leg like through the hole, like, but it's really like Darkman takes him by the neck and throws him through walls, basically. And so he was describing how that was filmed. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting, and they cut it out because
like the set was turned, like when they did the Bruce Campbell getting all the blood thrown at him, and
exactly.
Evil Dead 2. Okay,
that's exactly right. Yeah, and they drop the guy through the holes, but it makes it look like when Darkman
like
throws him, he just throws
through.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'd like to see that.
And there's apparently a scene too. He holds him up on the neck against the wall, and he like punches around his head to try to get information out of him. But according to him, you could see some like hydraulic thing they had in his arm where it was like hitting the wall, and it fucked it up. They never used it. Liam Neeson says he still has his hat and short from Darkman. He hangs on to that.
He stole him.
Yeah. He also had a fear of heights, so they filmed some like green screen stuff with him like hanging, and Sam told him not to worry about it, and they left him 50 feet in the air, and he like didn't realize it until he like looked down and saw he was 50 feet in the air,
hanging from the helicopter,
and he said he was frozen, completely frozen, ruined everything. And Larry Drake, on the other hand, it's his very first helicopter ride, and he said Sam sent him up alone the first time when they first got the helicopter, and just to see, Larry Drake believes, to see if he would barf when stuff happened. And he said the helicopter started doing weird shit. He said he remembered just like being above a freeway, like sideways, looking down at the street right directly below him.
Oof.
And it was like a lesson in centrifugal force, he said. Like, he was just like, I'm only in here because he's like, I've got the seatbelt, but he's like, I'm in here because of centrifugal force. But he loved it. And he said that Sam, after that, would always be like, you want to go up in the helicopter? Let's go up in the helicopter. And so there was that. This was the first direct-to-video release that Universal ever did. Or I'm sorry, part 2 was the first.
I was about to say, this is not direct-to-video.
Because of the sales of this one. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. In his memoir, If Chins Could Kill, Bruce Campbell explains that in a rough cut of this film, there was a scene where Louis Strack Jr., the main antagonist, played by Colin Frills, spreads gold all over the covers of his bed, strips naked, and lays on top of it, laughing maniacally and in ecstasy. And it was deemed by a test audience as too disturbing. And so they cut it from the film. And Campbell does not understand that because he thought that was his personal favorite scene.
I think one of the Universal execs like turned to him during a screening and says, "There's no fucking way this is making the final movie."
There was another thing that if you watch back, Durant is there's a hint that Durant and Ricky, played by Sam Raimi's version, or brother version, Sam Raimi's brother, are a gay couple. Like Durant will touch him in scenes and be like, "I'm so proud of you." And like,
I know he likes Ricky.
You definitely get that vibe from the final product too, though.
Yeah. I think it's still there. I just think it like gets blown past by some people, but it's definitely there that they're like a couple or something.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the casting, this is the final one. Jenny Agutter, American Werewolf in London, is the burn ward doctor in there. But one person we didn't mention is that John Landis is the bearded and masked physician. Yeah, he has the large glasses. Who's watching? He'll reprise that role in Spider-Man 2 during the Doc Ock scene.
No shit.
Oh, wow.
And it says he's the doctor. Like, there's a scene where his glasses reflect the tentacle waking up. And,
and that's John Landis?
And it's John Landis.
I had no idea. The murderer himself, John Landis. Manslaughter.
Yeah. So there you go. There's just
I've got a fun fact.
Okay.
So Bruce Campbell had just gotten divorced from his first wife just before the filming of this began, and he was broke. And it would have been nice probably for him to get the lead in a Universal film, but the studio wouldn't allow that. But in post-production, Sam called Bruce, and he's like, he's like, I got some problems like on this movie. I need a little bit of help, Bruce. So Bruce comes in to help him, and a lot of his contributions were actually in sound production. I mean, he doesn't get credited in this at all, but Bruce Campbell worked in the sound department on this film. Wow. He actually ended up doing ADR voiceover for every criminal. This is according to Bruce Campbell, for every criminal who fell to their death. So Bruce Campbell's just in the studio, just screaming a lot, like Wilhelm scream style. Every time you see a villain fall to their death, the voice is Bruce Campbell's. And at one point, when Raimi was mixing the film, he needed Darkman to yell Julie. There's like a moment where he's got to go Julie, and they had not recorded Liam Neeson doing that. So he called Bruce over. He's like, get in the booth. I need you to yell Julie. So Bruce Campbell actually looped the voice of Liam Neeson yelling Julie in one scene. And then Campbell looped all of Neeson's lines that needed to be changed for the TV version of the film. So and you know how they'll have to like change certain lines because of profanity and stuff.
Yeah.
Anytime that you hear that in the TV version, it's Bruce Campbell's voice. Doing like a Liam Neeson impression.
Wow. How about that?
Isn't that fun? That's fun. Anyway, after Darkman's success, Universal was happy to be in the Sam Raimi business, and they offered to help fund his next film. This is a film that was already in the works before Darkman ever went into production, and they would end up partnering with producer Dino De Laurentiis to help finance Raimi's next project, the third film in his Evil Dead series, and the subject of our next episode. You guys all know what film we're talking about. It is, of course, Army of Darkness.
Yes.
Easy to find. Go stream it. Go buy it. Great looking 4K. Just came out from Scream Factory. So yes, there's a lot of. It's a very easy film to find, and I'm very excited to revisit it and talk about it. There are 4 different cuts of that film.
That's what I was just about to bring up.
I will be watching I will definitely be watching the theatrical cut because that's the one that has the 4K restoration on it. I will probably also watch at least the director's cut. I don't know if I'll watch all 4, but I'll at least watch the director's cut and the original theatrical cut. So if you only have time to watch one, which I totally understand, I would say watch the theatrical cut.
Nice. Yeah, that feels right. One quote that I saw on that interview, and again, this of course, was before the movie was released, and he went through a lot of shit, but I thought this quote was very Sam Raimi-ish and fit with our series very much. The folks that were interviewing him asked him how he was feeling being in the studio film and what you were doing, and about being what he was doing with like being a film director and that sort of thing, and what mark he hoped to leave on the world. And I liked this. He said, "I'm very happy at my job. I'm very lucky that I get to write a story and give it to people to consider who can evaluate it and consider it for making it into a movie. I have an opportunity to entertain people. I'm honored. It is a much coveted job, and I hope I don't mess it up. I hope people are entertained by Darkman. What mark do I want to leave on the world? I hope that I leave the world with a few good gags, some interesting stories, and some spitting hellfire." Just kidding.
I love that. I just love that guy. Nice. He seems like he's like one of the little rascals. Like even as like a 40-year-old man, he's like a little rascal.
Yeah, he's just fun. And you can't hate on.
It's very old fashioned.
That wholesomeness,
and by Darkman, he had adapted the process of wearing a shirt and tie on set all the time. Which
Liam Neeson talks about that was one of his favorite things about him.
Yeah.
Just how
I don't know if he did it on
was.
Evil Dead 2, but I know he's doing it on Darkman, and he did that because he's like, this is a job. This is me showing respect to the people who came to work today, basically my actors and my crew. Because Hitchcock did the same thing, and that's kind of where he got it.
Classy, very classy,
classy guy. He still does it to this day. Shows up on set in a suit and tie, like he's going to an office job, but it's really just he's not being pretentious. He's just trying to show respect, to the people that work for him, which I think is nice. Anyway, that's it for Darkman. Join us on our next episode where we'll be talking about Army of Darkness. Where can you gentlemen be found on the internet?
I am This is Gary Horne on all the social medias. You can find my wrestling podcast at TIPW Show. Also follow the NWA at NWA. Easy enough.
As we continue on this year, again, I'm not plugging my own stuff, but please consider donating to my friend Alyssa Fowler, who's raising money for her and her daughter. They both have cancer. We are doing a benefit comedy show here in Greenville, December 6th at the Radio Room. If you're curious, they also have a GoFundMe page, and the title is Cancer Treatments for Both My Daughter and I. We've got the link. I believe Justin's putting that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So please, anything you can give. I know stuff's tight right now and we're getting towards the holidays, but this family really needs your help. So if you can spare any money, it's going to a very, very good cause. And we really, really appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, I feel like I shouldn't promote myself after
For
that.
real, I feel like a real dick right now.
But you can follow me at Justin_Bishop. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. I guess I'm still on Twitter. Maybe by time that this episode comes out, Twitter will have imploded. Who the fuck knows? We're watching it go down in real time. So maybe if Twitter's still around, follow me at Justin_Bishop, even though I rarely use it anyway, or Letterboxd, which is where I am most active. Of course, you can find the show at cinema_shock in all the normal places. We're on Facebook. We have the Cinema Shock Movie Club group on Facebook. Go join that. Go join our Discord. Go to cinemashock.net. You have links to all that stuff, including our merch. Buy a t-shirt. We've got Christmas coming up. We've got all the holidays coming up. There will be some holiday sales. I think we've got a big Black Friday sale coming up where you can get shirts, Cinema Shock shirts at a discount. And just keep in mind, we don't make any money off those shirts. We're really just doing it because we like the idea of somebody wearing a Cinema Shock shirt. We think it's pretty cool that you like the show enough to buy a shirt. So you're supporting us not financially that way, but just by getting the name and the logo out there into the wild. And then maybe somebody will say, hey, what is Cinema Shock? And then you say, hey, it's my favorite podcast and you should listen to it. Of course, you can also find all of our episodes on our website as well. And until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather. What was the other line I was supposed to say?
Extrapolate this dick.
Oh, yeah.
That's what you're saying.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather. Extrapolate this dick.
And be excellent to each other.
When I was young, my father made me work high steel. Just me and Johnny. No one else crazy enough to run around up here against the wind. $4.50 an hour. Call me crazy? Sometimes I miss it. Life on the Keys. 5 inches wide, 650 feet down.
What a bizarre monologue to choose.
I gotta keep you guessing.
Did anybody ever get bothered when they were showing the office space with Strack and like in the background you'd see like they were building the area But it's like those fucking cranes on the top of the buildings were like constantly spinning. Like they were just like back and forth. And I'm like, I don't think it works like that, man. It was like spinning in circles.
That seems dangerous.
This was like drunk people there doing construction on your shit. Anyway, all right. Thanks, everybody.